Welcome to our channel. Hollywood Movie Review. Black Swan 2010 Movie Review. Black Swan is a 2010 American psychological horror thriller film directed by Darren Aronofsky, from a screenplay by Mark Heyman, John McLaughlin, and Andres Heinz, and based on a story by Heinz. Starring Natalie Portman, Vincent Cassel, Mila Kunis, Barbara Hershey, and Winona Ryder, the film follows a production of Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake by the Company of New York City Ballet, led by artistic director Thomas Leroy Cassel. The production requires a ballerina to play the innocent and fragile white swan, for which the committed dancer Nina Sayers, Portman, is a perfect fit, as well as the dark and sensual Black Swan, which are qualities better embodied by the new rival Lily Kunis. Nina is overwhelmed by immense pressure when she finds herself competing for the role, causing her to lose her tenuous grip on reality and descend into madness. Aronofsky conceived the premise by connecting his viewings of a production of Swan Lake with an unrealized screenplay about understudies and the notion of being haunted by a double, similar to the folklore surrounding doppelgangers. Aronofsky cites Fyodor Dostoevsky's The Double as another inspiration for the film. Aronofsky also considered Black Swan a companion piece to his film The Wrestler, 2008, with both films revolving around demanding performances for different kinds of art. He and Portman first discussed the project in 2000, and after a brief attachment to Universal Pictures, Black Swan was produced in New York City in late 2009 by Fox Searchlight Pictures. Portman and Kunis trained in ballet for several months prior to filming. Black Swan premiered at the 67th Venice International Film Festival on September 1, 2010, and had a limited release in the United States starting on December 3, before opening in wide release on December 17. Upon release, the film received widespread acclaim from critics, with praise toward Aronofsky's direction and the performances of Portman, Kunis, and Hershey. It also emerged as a major commercial success at the box office, grossing $332.1 million worldwide on a $13 million budget. The film received 5 nominations at the 83rd Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director for Aronofsky, with Portman winning Best Actress. It also received 4 nominations at the 68th Golden Globe Awards, including Best Motion Picture, Drama and Best Director for Aronofsky, with Portman winning Best Actress in a Motion Picture, Drama. In 2021, Portman's performance was included in the New Yorker's list of the best film performances of the 21st century. Nina Sayers, a young dancer with the New York City Ballet, lives with her overprotective mother, Erica, a former ballerina. The company is opening the season with Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake. After forcing the current prima ballerina, Beth, into retirement, artistic director Thomas Leroy announces he is looking for a new dancer for the dual roles of the innocent and fragile white swan, Odette, and the sensual and dark black swan, Odile. Nina auditions and gives a flawless performance as Odette, but fails to embody Odile, causing Thomas to dismiss her. The next day, Nina asks Thomas to reconsider. He forcibly kisses her and she bites him and runs out of his office. Later, Nina is surprised to find she has received the lead role. At a gala celebrating the new season, an intoxicated Beth publicly accuses Nina of providing sexual favors to Thomas in return for the role. The next day, Nina hears Beth has been hit by a car. Thomas believes she was attempting suicide. Nina visits Beth in the hospital and is distraught to see her injured legs. It is clear she will never dance again. During rehearsals, Thomas tells Nina to observe a newcomer, Lily, who has a physical resemblance to Nina but also an uninhibited quality Nina lacks. Nina has hallucinations and finds scratch marks on her back. One night, despite Erica's objections, Nina accepts Lily's invitation to go out for drinks. Lily offers Nina an ecstasy capsule, which Nina rejects. Lily pours the ecstasy capsule into Nina's drink. While intoxicated, Nina flirts with men at the bar and Lily as well. After the two dance at a nightclub, they go back to Nina's apartment and have sex. The next morning, Nina wakes up disoriented and alone and realizes that she is late for rehearsal. At rehearsal, Nina sees Lily dancing as Odile and confronts her about their sexual encounter. Lily denies that it happened and mocks Nina for fantasizing about her. Nina becomes convinced Lily intends to replace her, especially after learning that Thomas has made Lily her alternate. Nina's mysterious injuries and hallucinations grow more severe, leading to an incident where she believes she is transforming into Odile. Erica grows concerned about her well-being and attempts to prevent Nina from performing on opening night. After a physical confrontation with her mother and a confrontation with Beth, Nina arrives at the theater, where she finds Lily preparing to take the stage as Odette because Nina has been absent. Nina convinces Thomas to allow her to take back her role. Towards the end of the ballet's second act, Nina is distracted by a hallucination and loses her balance during a lift, causing Prince Siegfried to drop her, infuriating Thomas. Nina returns to her dressing room and finds Lily preparing to play Odile. She confronts her and Lily appears to transform into a doppelganger copy of Nina. The two fight, breaking a mirror. Nina stabs her doppelganger with a shard of glass, killing her and breaking the illusion. Nina hides Lily's body and takes the stage. She dances flawlessly as Odile and seemingly begins to turn into a black swan, her arms covered in feathers. Amidst a standing ovation from the audience, Nina surprises Thomas with a passionate kiss. In her dressing room, Nina resumes the Odette tutu and white swan makeup, but is interrupted by Lily, who congratulates Nina for her performance. Nina sees the mirror is still broken, but all other evidence of the stabbing is gone, including the body. She looks down and pulls a piece of glass from her abdomen, realizing she stabbed herself and not Lily. Despite her injury, she dances the final act of the ballet with blood gradually seeping through her costume. The show ends with her jumping from the set onto a hidden mattress to simulate Odette throwing herself off a cliff. Everyone erupts in thunderous applause while Thomas, Lily, and the other dancers gather to congratulate Nina backstage. Thomas eventually realizes Nina is bleeding and shouts for help, asking Nina what happened. Nina calmly replies, "I felt it. Perfect. I was perfect," as the screen fades to white. Darren Aronofsky first became interested in ballet when his sister studied dance at the High School of Performing Arts in New York City. The basic idea for the film started when he hired screenwriters to rework a screenplay called The Understudy, which portrayed off-Broadway actors and explored the notion of being haunted by a double. Aronofsky said the screenplay had elements of All About Eve, 1950, Roman Polanski's The Tenant, 1976, and Fyodor Dostoevsky's novella The Double. The director had also seen numerous productions of Swan Lake, and he connected the duality of the White Swan and the Black Swan to the script. When researching for the production of Black Swan, Aronofsky found ballet to be a very insular world whose dancers were not impressed by movies. Regardless, the director found active and inactive dancers to share their experiences with him. He also stood backstage to see the Bolshoi Ballet perform at the Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts. Aronofsky called Black Swan a companion piece to his previous film The Wrestler, recalling one of his early projects about a love affair between a wrestler and a ballerina. He eventually separated the wrestling and the ballet worlds as too much for one movie. He compared the two films. Wrestling some consider the lowest art, if they would even call it art, and ballet some people consider the highest art. But what was amazing to me was how similar the performers in both of these worlds are. They both make incredible use of their bodies to express themselves. About the psychological thriller nature of Black Swan, actress Natalie Portman compared the film's tone to Polanski's 1968 film Rosemary's Baby, while Aronofsky said Polanski's Repulsion, 1965, and The Tenant, 1976, were big influences on the final film. Actor Vincent Cassel also compared Black Swan to Polanski's early works and additionally compared it to David Cronenberg's early works. Aronofsky first discussed with Natalie Portman the possibility of a ballet film in 2000, and he found she was interested in playing a ballet dancer. Portman explained being part of Black Swan I'm trying to find roles that demand more adulthood from me because you can get stuck in a very awful cute cycle as a woman in film, especially being such a small person. Portman suggested to Aronofsky that her good friend Mila Kunis would be perfect for the role. Kunis contrasted Lily with Nina, "My character is very loose. She's not as technically good as Natalie's character, but she has more passion, naturally. That's what lacks." The female characters are directed in the Swan Lake production by Thomas Leroy, played by Cassel. He compared his character to George Balanchine, who co-founded New York City Ballet and was a control freak, a true artist using sexuality to direct his dancers. Portman and Kunis started training 6 months before the start of filming in order to attain a body type and muscle tone more similar to those of professional dancers. Portman worked out for 5 hours a day, doing ballet, cross-training, and swimming. A few months closer to filming, she began choreography training. Kunis engaged in cardio and Pilates, training 7 days a week, 5 hours, for 6 months total, and was put on a very strict diet of 1,200 calories a day. She lost 20 pounds, 9 kilograms, from her normal weight of about 117 pounds, 53 kilograms, and reported that Portman became smaller than I did. Kunis said, "I did ballet as a kid, like every other kid does ballet. You wear a tutu and you stand on stage and you look cute and twirl. But this is very different because you can't fake it. You can't just stay in there and like pretend you know what you're doing. Your whole body has to be structured differently." Georgina Parkinson, a ballet mistress from the American Ballet Theatre, ABT, coached the actors in ballet. ABT soloists Sarah Lane and Maria Riccito served as dance doubles for Portman and Kunis, respectively. Dancer Kimberly Proza also served as a double for Portman. She stated, "Natalie took class, she studied for several months, from the waist up is her." Sarah Lane, a soloist at ABT, did the heavy tricks, she did the fouettes, but they only had her for a limited time, a couple of weeks, so I did the rest of whatever dance shots they needed. In addition to the soloist performances, members of the Pennsylvania Ballet were cast as the corps de ballet, backdrop for the main actors' performances. Also appearing in the film are Christina Anipa Toby Hemingway, Sebastian Stan, and Janet Montgomery. Aronofsky and Portman first discussed a ballet film in 2000, after the release of his second film Requiem for a Dream, 2000, though the script had not yet been written. He told her about a love scene between competing ballet dancers, and Portman recalled, "I thought that was very interesting because this film is in so many ways an exploration of an artist's ego and that narcissistic sort of attraction to yourself and also repulsion with yourself." On the decade's wait before production, she said, "The fact that I had spent so much time with the idea, allowed it to marinate a little before we shot." Portman and Kunis described filming the intimate scenes between Nina and Lily as challenging because they were close friends, though their friendship and trust ultimately made the experience easier to handle. Portman said filmmakers were concerned about attracting audiences to a ballet film, joking that the lesbian scene was viewed as a way to draw viewers. The actresses also recalled that Aronofsky tried to heighten the rivalry between their characters by encouraging tension and commenting on their performances, though they recognized the tactic and maintained their friendship. The screenplay The Understudy was written by Andres Heinz. Aronofsky first heard about it while editing Requiem for a Dream and described it as all about Eve with a double, set in the off-Broadway world. After making The Fountain, 2006, Aronofsky and producer Mike Medavoy had screenwriter John McLaughlin rewrite The Understudy. Aronofsky said, "McLaughlin took my idea of Swan Lake and the ballet and put into the ballet world and changed the title to Black Swan." When Aronofsky proposed a detailed outline of Black Swan to Universal Pictures, the studio decided to fast-track development of the project in January 2007. The project sort of died, again according to Aronofsky, until after the making of The Wrestler, 2008, when he had Mark Heyman, Director of Development of Aronofsky's production company Protozoa Pictures, write for Black Swan and made it something that was workable. By June 2009, Universal had placed the project in turnaround, generating attention from other studios and specialty divisions, particularly with actress Portman attached to star. Black Swan began development under Protozoa Pictures and Overnight Productions, the latter financing the film. In July 2009, Kunis was cast. Fox Searchlight Pictures distributed Black Swan and gave the film a production budget of $10 to $12 million. Principal photography was achieved using Super 16mm cameras and began in New York City toward the end of 2009. Part of filming took place at the Performing Arts Center at State University of New York at Purchase. Aronofsky filmed Black Swan with a muted palette and a grainy style, which he intended to be similar to The Wrestler. Aronofsky said, "I like Super 16 because the cameras are really light, really movable. Also, for The Wrestler, it was a money-saving thing. The film stocks on 35mm would become so glossy that they'd get close to what people are doing on video. I wanted to go back to the grainy, verite cinema feel of The Wrestler. Like with wrestling, ballet is shot in wide shot with 2 shots on the side, and no one really brought the camera well, wrestling into the ring or for us, onto the stage and into the practice room. I really wanted the camera to dance, but I was nervous about shooting a psychological thriller/horror film with a handheld camera. I couldn't think of another example where they did that. Steadicams are very different than handhelds, because handheld gives you that verite feel. I was concerned if that would affect the suspense, but after a while I said, screw it, let's go for it." Cinematographer Matthew Libatique shot the film on 16mm film. The non-original music featured in Black Swan consists of music by Tchaikovsky featuring performances on screen and in the soundtrack by violinist Tim Fain and a track of electronica dance music by English production duo The Chemical Brothers. It marks the 5th consecutive collaboration between Aronofsky and English composer Clint Mansell, who composed the original score for the film. Mansell attempted to score the film based on Tchaikovsky's ballet but with radical changes to the music. Because of the use of Tchaikovsky's music, the score was deemed ineligible to be entered into the 2010 Academy Awards for Best Original Score. The Chemical Brothers music, which is featured prominently during the club scene in the film, is omitted from the soundtrack album. Black Swan had its world premiere as the opening film at the 67th Venice Film Festival on September 1, 2010. It received a standing ovation whose length Variety said made it one of the strongest Venice openers in recent memory. The festival's artistic director Marco Mueller had chosen Black Swan over The American, starring George Clooney, for opening film, saying, "It was just a better fit. Clooney is a wonderful actor, and he will always be welcome in Venice." But it was as simple as that. Black Swan screened in competition and is the 3rd consecutive film directed by Aronofsky to premiere at the festival, following The Fountain, 2006, and The Wrestler. Black Swan was presented in a sneak screening at the Telluride Film Festival on September 5, 2010. It also had a gala screening at the 35th Toronto International Film Festival later in the month. In October 2010, Black Swan was screened at the New Orleans Film Festival, the Austin Film Festival, and the BFI London Film Festival. In November 2010, the film was screened at American Film Institute's AFI Fest in Los Angeles, the Denver Film Festival and Came-Image Festival in Bydgoszcz, Poland. The release of Black Swan in the United Kingdom was preponed from February 11 to January 21, 2011. According to The Independent, the film was considered one of the most highly anticipated films of 2010. The newspaper then compared it to the 1948 ballet film The Red Shoes in having a nightmarish quality, of a dancer consumed by her desire to dance. The film was re-released, remastered exclusively for IMAX to celebrate its 15th anniversary on August 21, 2025 and August 24, 2025. Black Swan was released on DVD and Blu-ray in Region 1/Region A on March 29, 2011. The Region 2/Region B version was released on May 16, 2011. Black Swan had a limited release in select cities in North America on December 3, 2010, in 18 theaters and was a surprise box office success. The film took in a total of $415,822 on its opening day, averaging $23,101 per theater. By the end of its opening weekend it grossed $1,443,809.80,212 per theater. The per location average was the second highest for the opening weekend of 2010 behind The King's Speech. The film is Fox Searchlight Pictures' highest per theater average gross ever, and it ranks 21st on the all-time list. On its second weekend the film expanded to 90 theaters, and grossed $3.3 million, ranking it as the sixth film at the box office. In its third weekend, it expanded again to 959 theaters and grossed $8,383,479. The film went on to gross over $106 million in the United States and over $329 million worldwide. Black Swan received positive reviews from critics upon release, with praise toward Aronofsky's direction and the performances of Portman, Kunis, and Hershey. Review aggregator Rotten Tomatoes gives the film an approval rating of 85% based on 318 reviews, and an average rating of 8.20/10. The website's critical consensus reads, "Bracingly intense, passionate, and wildly melodramatic, Black Swan glides on Darren Aronofsky's bold direction and a bravura, tour de force performance from Natalie Portman." At Metacritic, which assigns a weighted average score out to reviews, the film received an average score of 79 out of 100, based on 42 critics, indicating generally positive reviews. In September 2010, Entertainment Weekly reported that based on reviews from the film's screening at the Venice Film Festival, Black Swan is already set to be one of the year's most loved or hated films. Leonard Maltin, on his blog Movie Crazy, admitted that he couldn't stand the film, despite highly praising Portman's performance. Reuters described the early response to the film as largely positive, with Portman's performance being highly praised. The Sydney Morning Herald reported that the film divided critics. Some found its theatricality maddening, but most declared themselves swept away. Kurt Loder of Reason called the film wonderfully creepy, and wrote that it's not entirely satisfying, but it's infused with the director's usual creative brio, and it has a great dark gleaming look. Mike Goodridge from Screen Daily called Black Swan alternately disturbing and exhilarating and described the film as a hybrid of The Turning Point, 1977, and Polanski's films Repulsion, 1965, and Rosemary's Baby, 1968. Goodridge described Portman's performance, "She is captivating as Nina. She captures the confusion of a repressed young woman thrown into a world of danger and temptation with frightening veracity." The critic also commended Cassel, Kunis, and Hershey in their supporting roles, particularly comparing Hershey to Ruth Gordon in the role of the desperate, jealous mother. Goodridge praised Libatik's cinematography with the dance scenes and the psychologically unnerving scenes. "It's a mesmerizing psychological ride that builds to a gloriously theatrical tragic finale as Nina attempts to deliver the perfect performance." Kirk Honeycutt of The Hollywood Reporter gave the film a mixed review. He wrote, "Black Swan is an instant guilty pleasure, a gorgeously shot, visually complex film whose badness is what's so good about it. You might howl at the sheer audacity of mixing mental illness with the body-fatiguing, mind-numbing rigors of ballet, but its lurid imagery and a Hellcat competition between two rival dancers is pretty irresistible." Honeycutt commended Mila Kunis's sumptuous choreography and Libatik's darting, weaving camera work. The critic said of the thematic mashup, "Aronofsky never succeeds in wedding genre elements to the world of ballet. White Swan/Black Swan dynamics almost work, but the horror movie nonsense drags everything down the rabbit hole of preposterousness." Similarly, in a piece for the Huffington Post, Rob Kirkpatrick praised Portman's performance but compared the film's story to that of Showgirls, 1995, and Burlesque, 2010, while concluding Black Swan is simply higher-priced cheese, Aronofsky's camembert to Burlesque director Steve Anton's cheddar. Vulture's Kyle Buchanan also noted the similarities of the film's plot to the widely derided Showgirls, and said that the director Darren Aronofsky owes a feather tip to Paul Verhoeven's exploitation classic more than might be willing to admit. The film has been criticized for its portrayal of ballet and ballet dancers. Upon the film's release in the United Kingdom, The Guardian interviewed 4 professional ballet dancers in the UK, Tamara Rojo, Lauren Cuthbertson, Edward Watson, and Elena Glurgic. Rojo called the film lazy, featuring every ballet cliché going. Watson felt that the film makes ballet look so naff and laughable. It doesn't show why ballet is so important to us, why we would want to try so hard. The Canadian press also reported that many Canadian ballet dancers felt that the film depicted dancers negatively and exaggerated elements of their lives but gave Portman high marks for her dance technique. In an interview with the Los Angeles Times, Gillian Murphy, a principal dancer with American Ballet Theatre, praised the visual elements of the film but noted that the film presentation of the ballet world was extreme. Several critics noted striking similarities between Satoshi Kon's 1997 anime film Perfect Blue and Aronofsky's Black Swan. In response to comparisons between Perfect Blue and Black Swan, Aronofsky acknowledged the similarities in 2010, but denied that Black Swan was inspired by Perfect Blue. Kon noted in his blog that he had met with Aronofsky in 2001. Amy Westcott is credited as the costume designer and received several award nominations. A publicized controversy arose regarding the question of who had designed 40 ballet costumes for Portman and the dancers. An article in the British newspaper The Independent suggested those costumes had actually been created by Rodarti's Kate and Laura Mulvey. Westcott challenged that view and stated that in all only 7 costumes, among them the Black and White Swan, had been created in a collaboration between Rodarti, Westcott, and Aronofsky. Furthermore, the core ballet's costumes were designed by Zac Brown, for the American Ballet Theatre, and slightly adapted by Westcott and her costume design department. Westcott said, "Controversy is too complimentary a word for 2 people using their considerable self-publicizing resources to loudly complain about their credit once they realized how good the film is." ABT dancer Sarah Lane served as a dance double for Portman in the film. In a March 3 blog entry for Dance magazine, editor-in-chief Wendy Perrone asked, "Do people really believe that it takes only 1 year to make a ballerina? We know that Natalie Portman studied ballet as a kid and had a year of intensive training for the film, but that doesn't add up to being a ballerina. However, it seems that many people believe that Portman did her own dancing in Black Swan." This led to responses from Benjamin Millepied and Aronofsky, who both defended Portman, as well as a response from Lane claiming that she has not been given due credit. "I've soured on Darren Aronofsky heavily over the years. I remember when I first saw Requiem for a Dream and initially I thought that it was an emotionally draining experience, and now it only ever manages to ring me as exploitative of its own character's misery at the hands of an agreeable message. But this was not something I found to be exclusive towards said film, because Black Swan, which may very well be his worst film yet, only manages to rub me in the wrong way for similar reasons. But for the many shortcomings of Requiem for a Dream, it never felt condescending in the way that Black Swan was. Among many reasons it has only ever managed to leave such a bitter taste in my mouth. It seems so insistent that perfection leads to equally perfect art, and it's a product so explicitly mechanical its own message only falls down upon itself. And the one thought that came to my mind after finishing up read, this is why I hate Darren Aronofsky." Natalie Portman stars as Nina, the lead dancer for Swan Lake. In order to achieve artistic perfection, this also means it will cost her own sanity and even turn her own role much like that of Odile, the Black Swan, just as she finds her own life beginning to parallel that of Swan Lake while not being a literal follow beat by beat. To try my best to avoid comparing Black Swan to films that have already handled similar stories better, The Red Shoes and Perfect Blue, the latter of which Aronofsky himself had purchased the rights for in order to recreate a scene in Requiem for a Dream. I'll get it out of the way that Black Swan is already telling a story that has been done before, which is the least of my own problems with it. Rather instead, my immense dislike of Black Swan lies within how it tells what we've already seen before, as it only comes off as needlessly exploitative of her own misery in favor of artistic perfection. This sort of pessimism was one thing that has always stuck out most from my own viewing of Requiem for a Dream. Darren Aronofsky relishes in it by placing so much on the surface, and the most aggravating aspect of said film came from how it further pushes down upon an agreeable message without expanding on it by growing increasingly worse on the surface. In Black Swan's scenario, it seems to be the same for presenting Nina's misery of working within the world of dancing, where she's forced to grow into the sort of person that she is in order to achieve artistic perfection, which is where Aronofsky loses subtlety with the narrative, for he's always played upon melodrama like a sledgehammer, something that I'd also find myself appreciating more if this film weren't taking itself as seriously as it was. By Aronofsky's lens, it only believes in misery, and it's an extremely oppressive one at that. Among many more of its own exploits, Nina's forced sexual growth as a result of her own instructor, as played by Vincent Cassel, also brings up another one of its biggest faults. There's an uncomfortable male gaze coming in with every minute of the interactions between Lily and Nina, for their own homosexuality feels portrayed as a fantasy for the outside as opposed to a part of themselves. But how Black Swan goes away with handling its idea of duality is perhaps the most troubling aspect, because it revels in another overused trope from horror movies, split personalities. But considering how many times it shifts between identities without setting a distinguished tone for each, it all feels like worthless meandering. Everything that the film wants to be feels present on the surface, tossed out in favor of another idea, then brought back at the last minute. There's no thought coming forth as opposed to broad self-indulgence. If Natalie Portman were even any good in Black Swan, then I'd be convinced that a film destroying artistic perfection truly is baked out to be the way it is. But coming back to the artificiality of the film's narrative, most of the cast only strikes me as mechanical. Perhaps part of this comes from me not being a fan of Natalie Portman, but her hallucinatory performance only strikes me as overdone, like a bad mix of melodrama and horror tropes. The whole cast feels so mechanical, almost as much as the dancing itself, but that adds more to why I find Black Swan so ingenuine. It just seems to pride itself on aggressiveness in the same manner that Aronofsky had went on to pride himself on appearing more intelligent than it actually is, for it's all just bare bones we see. Aronofsky doesn't blur the line between a hallucination and reality, and as a result the final reveal only feels anticlimactic. Sometimes I wish I was able to appreciate Darren Aronofsky the way I know many of my peers do, but other than The Wrestler and The Fountain, he's only seemed to let me down with every film after another. I won't deny that he's good at what he does, and I see why these films carry the appeal they do, but I just find Black Swan so unpleasant an experience even to think about. There's no subtlety present in Black Swan, but at the same time I don't see much point when I know already I recognize so much of it as derivative of many other films that have handled a similar outlining better, for they don't indulge in the needless exploitation that Black Swan does. It all feels so sleazy in the sense that Brian De Palma was, although without being any bit as fun or as interesting, because the lack of subtlety only shows an evident lack of self-reflexivity on Darren Aronofsky's part, for it's all kept on the surface. I suppose this indulgence would have its appeal for some, but clearly not me. You might be noticing a trend in the movies I'm reviewing, or at least the fact that the past few haven't really been horror films, and rather are films that won awards, or some shit. Or at least, I haven't been reviewing as many horror movies as you'd like, so you'll have to deal with it. For example, Black Swan is a critically acclaimed film, but only dork losers would call it a horror film. To this day, I have yet to see the trailer for this movie, which I think is a good thing, considering how many fucking people have been hyping this movie since it came out, and the trailer would have made me dislike it before even seeing it. I do remember the poster where Natalie Portman has on shitty eye makeup, and I also know that this has something to do with dancing, and that Darren Aronofsky is kind of insane, but generally in a good way. Oh, and I got a comment yesterday about spoilers in the town, and this is just a reminder that I will probably always post spoilers, except if the enjoyment of the film hinges on what the surprise or twist is. For example, I am going to tell you the ending of this movie, yet I don't feel as though the ending was a surprise, nor did the enjoyment of the movie increase or decrease with the ending. Natalie Portman plays a dancer named Nina who lives with her crazy mother who clearly failed in her own attempt to become a ballerina. Nina has the opportunity to take the lead in a famous director's version of Swan Lake, with that director being played by Vincent Cassel, who is always awesome in everything. In the audition process, Cassel's character explains that for the lead role, Nina will have to portray both a white swan and a black swan, one being good and one being evil, and that despite being an incredible white swan, he believes she doesn't have what it takes to be the black swan. Lucky for her, she proves herself enough to get the part. She's nervous that a newcomer named Lily, played by Mila Kunis, will take over the part if she fails, yet sparks up a friendship with Lily anyway, who is nothing but encouraging. Cassel starts becoming more and more sexually explicit with Nina, physically engaging with her as well as instructing her to touch herself when she has the opportunity, hoping that it will bring out a different aspect of her that is required to play the Black Swan. She takes this advice, and then realizes that her mom was asleep with her in the room while fucking her own hand. Awkward, in addition to the stress of feeling like she isn't good enough and nervous about Lily, Nina also is apparently scratching her back intensely without even knowing it, to the point of not remembering her wounds. This has been a problem before, as her mom knows how to trim her nails to stop it from happening, as well as using expensive makeup to cover the wounds. Nina begins to fall deeper and deeper into her paranoid frenzy, picturing her face on other people, going out and doing drugs with Lily, and fantasizing about a sexual encounter with her, which, by the way, takes place 69 minutes into the film. Awesome. Her relationship with Lily, as well as with her mom, starts to reach a breaking point as opening night approaches, with her mom trying to lock her in her room and calling the theater to have her understudy, coincidentally Lily, stepping in for the role. Nina attacks her mom and is able to attend the show, taking the role away from Lily. The ballet has multiple acts and Nina portrays the white swan in the first act, and does so flawlessly, just how everyone expected her to. When she gets back to her dressing room, Lily is there waiting for her, and there is a violent altercation, which results in Nina stabbing Lily and locking her in a closet. The next act, Nina is playing the Black Swan, and after this violent altercation, goes out and shows herself as the Black Swan as no one has imagined she could, and blows everyone away. Upon getting back to her dressing room to prepare to portray the White Swan once again, she looks at her outfit and sees that she is bleeding from her stomach, and that Lily is not in the closet, but instead Lily knocks on the door to tell her how good of a job she is doing. Nina goes back on stage as the White Swan, and the ballet ends with the White Swan killing herself by jumping off of a platform, and when Nina does this, everyone rushes over to her to congratulate her, only to see the severity of her wounds. When asked what has happened to her wounds, which in hindsight were clearly self-inflicted, she claims that she was trying to obtain perfection, and the film goes bright white, and the credits start. Really had no fucking clue that this is what the movie was about. Since I knew some people had said it was scary or disturbing, and in moments it was, I really thought it was going to be something scary. Aside from the obvious fear behind someone who could have such extreme, dual, hallucinated personalities, there were really only a few moments that startled you or took you by surprise. Rather than horror, this film was a manifestation of an individual's worst fears and anxieties. There were some slow parts, that having just finished the film, I felt a little bored at times, but as I sit here typing out the plot, it sounds a lot more enjoyable than what I remember watching. Natalie Portman's performance was extremely subtle, to the point that after watching it, I wasn't really blown away by her portrayal, despite acknowledging she played the role well. Once again, in retrospect, her job was quite difficult, and the role was indeed very challenging, and she deserves more credit than I initially gave her. Natalie Portman did a great job, but I can't really say that she was the one who made this film. Aronofsky deserves just as much acclaim, especially for the subtleties he used throughout the film to hint at the things going on within the character's mind. Despite there being minimal visual effects, there were brief moments where not only was Nina not sure of what she saw, but the viewer was unsure as well. For example, the wounds on Nina's back looked like scratches, yet the skin looked strange around it as well. As the wounds developed further, it got to the point that it appeared as though Nina was growing feathers, to the point that she even pulled out a feather from under her skin. This effect culminated in her performance as the Black Swan, where she not only psychology had transformed, but further and further into her dancing, her feathers grew and grew and grew, to the point that when the dance was over, her arms had completely transformed into wings. I've seen a few Aronofsky films, and they typically are at one end of the spectrum or the other, at least as far as the intensity and complexity of the aesthetic elements as well as editing style. For example, both Requiem for a Dream and The Fountain are both quite ambitious in both style and subject matter, whether it be trying to portray characters in the lowest moments of their lives due to substance addiction or be it their time-traveling experiences because of a fountain of youth. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have The Wrestler, which is a dialogue-heavy, character-driven piece that was a lot more subdued and simple, at least in terms of the technical aspect of the movie. Black Swan started on one end, being mostly about Nina and her paranoia and fear, and gradually got closer and closer to the more experimental end of the spectrum, yet without seeming forced or fake. The more I talk about it, the more I want to see it again, because despite not being blown away upon first viewing, it's certainly worth another look. Oh, and Winona Ryder was in it too. Nina, a ballerina, gets the chance to play the White Swan, Princess Odette. But she finds herself slipping into madness when Thomas, the artistic director, decides that Lily might fit the role better. This film is in its story, visuals, and tone the quintessential, though not the best Aronofsky vehicle. When you think of him, you will think of this one for sure. The psychological elements were so effective here, with some of the imagery being striking and memorably horror-inspired. This was the film that brought Natalie Portman her Oscar, and deservedly so. She was excellent in this role that is honestly quite underwritten. I expected stronger character development in a film that focuses so heavily on Nina and her journey. But Portman elevated the role with a commendable, confident performance that is both very emotionally versatile and physically demanding. She was thoroughly believable in the first half when she was more demure, and also in the second half when she was genuinely unhinged. The movie features a ton of typecasting in the supporting roles, but I did not mind this as these people were obviously perfect for these types of roles. Vincent Cassel was a natural fit for this abusive director, while Barbara Hershey was so well cast in the role of the domineering mother. Mila Kunis stole the movie from these two in the role of her friend and biggest competition. The scenes between the two were easily the most entertaining ones of the bunch. Black Swan is at its best during those deranged moments. The psychological thriller elements were gloriously over the top and melodramatic, while also being superbly shot, scored and directed. Aronofsky has always been a perfect fit for this genre, and his directing on this movie is among his best undoubtedly. The movie is very well edited and paced, continuously being engaging to watch and at times even riveting. The ending worked for me, though I realize how some may find it frustrating. The imagery made this movie what it is, which is wonderfully surreal and ambiguous in quality. The film has that calm before the storm effect that made it very successful. It deserved most of its Oscar nominations and critical praise, with one caveat, and that is the screenplay. I have to say that I find Black Swan to be pretty much the meeting of two similarly themed movies released previously, The Red Shoes and Perfect Blue. The ballet scenes were very similar to the former classic, and the overall story beats were almost the same, while the thriller/horror elements and the double imagery were pretty much directly taken from the latter anime. It loses points for being so unoriginal for me. Black Swan is a 2010 American psychological horror film directed by Darren Aronofsky from a screenplay by Mark Heyman, John McLaughlin, and Andres Heinz, and is based on a story written by Heinz. This film stars Natalie Portman in the lead role, with Vincent Cassel, Mila Kunis, Barbara Hershey, and Winona Ryder in supporting roles. The plot of this film revolves around a production of Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake by the Company of New York City Ballet. This production requires one of their ballerinas to play the innocent and fragile white swan, in which Nina is a perfect fit, as well as the sensual and dark black swan, which is embodied by Nina's new rival, Lily. Nina gets overwhelmed by a feeling of thick pressure when she finds herself competing for the role, which causes her to lose her grip on reality and begins to spiral into madness. "Virginal girl, pure and sweet, trapped in the body of a swan," said Thomas Leroy, the ballet director played by Vincent Cassel. She desires freedom, but only true love can break the spell. Her wish is nearly granted in the form of a prince, but before he can declare his love, the lustful twin, the black swan, tricks and seduces him. Devastated, the white swan leaps off a cliff, killing herself, and in death finds freedom. This quote is delivered in the beginning, which sets the tone for the rest of the film. Nina effortlessly embodies the white swan, flawless, fragile, and pure. This is without her trying. However, the Swan Queen requires the white and black swan to be played entirely. Nina begins breaking out of her cage, and as this film goes on, her mental and physical state gets worse. She slowly begins to go more insane while transitioning into the black swan. This film depicts the mental state of a woman going through an intense amount of pressure to be perfect and flawless while she seems to be losing her mind and harming herself little by little. Near the beginning of the film, a red bloody scratch is being shown on Nina's back. She brushes it off and isn't sure how it's appeared. As she tries to escape from being just the white swan, she begins opening herself up to fully become the evil, seductive black swan, which are all features Lily, the second candidate for the Swan Queen role, can do better. Nina begins trying to become Lily and projects herself becoming the perfect black swan onto her. This is where her hallucinations begin. Nina begins shifting between reality and her false perceptions of herself and Lily. She begins going through stages of schizophrenia, where everything around her becomes abnormal. Her descent into a state of madness begins shortly after. She goes through an identity crisis and is imagining herself everywhere all at once. Her hallucinations even begin attacking her. She sees her legs bend backward and pulls a feather out of her cut. Mentally, she is becoming the black swan in a physical sense. Throughout this film, mirrors are constantly being shown. Nina is surrounded by them and they're being used to symbolize her slowly becoming somebody else entirely. It's a reflection of her current self undergoing metamorphosis. It also represents body image and the ongoing theme of perfection. Nina constantly says, "I just want to be perfect," and being in an industry as strict as ballet with body shape, size, and weight, the cost of perfection only comes with an incredibly large toll on one's mental and physical health. From the beginning of the film, we see Nina's room, which seems to emulate a child's room. Everything is fluffy and pink and she has stuffed animals surrounding her walls. This is all because of her mother's obsession with Nina being perfect and plays a significant role in the decline of Nina's mental and physical state. Nina's mother retired from being an artist at 28 to raise Nina, and because of this, she projects onto her and yearns for her to be flawless and do everything she couldn't, as she states, "I gave it up to raise you." She feels a strong sense of jealousy towards her daughter and treats her as if she's a child. Nina is being highly infantilized by her obsessive mother and isn't able to sensually evolve. She is stuck between being a child and a woman. Her mother forcefully helps her change and cuts her fingernails, insinuating she is a child who can't do it without her mother's help. Her mother seems to have BPD, bipolar disorder, and has a switch in her mood almost instantly. She's either one or the other. One example of this would be when she brought Nina a cake which Nina didn't want to eat because of calories, which then leads her mother to snap and move to throw away the entire cake. Nina's name also means little girl or young girl in Spanish, which can express the image her mother portrays onto her. Her mother is seen painting her over and over again and hanging her portraits up. Her obsession with Nina becoming the perfect person that she gave up her future to raise only worsens her state of mind. Lily, Nina's understudy in the role and the person Nina projects, the side she can't get in touch with, has a major role in the development of Nina and the psychosis Nina goes through. Lily embodies the White Swan's evil twin, perfectly seductive, lustful, and wild. It's natural to her, to the point that the director even points Nina towards her so she could get a look at what she's supposed to be like to efficiently play both parts. She gains an obsession with becoming just as wild as Lily, and that's when she begins hallucinating that not only is she sexually involved with Lily, but that she ends up killing her. Her physical awakening was postponed due to her overprotective mother, and although Nina and Lily being involved didn't actually happen, it opened up a path to a side Nina hasn't explored. Alongside this, her director's constant sexual advances towards her, as well as her body dysmorphia and lack of eating, pushed her to a harmful mental state. Colors in this film are very prominent and symbolize the stages Nina is going through to become the Black Swan. As the film begins, and for about 70% of it, we see mostly lighter shades being depicted, from her clothing to her surroundings. Then, we start to see more neutrals, and Nina's style slowly starts shifting into darker shades. At the end of the film we see darker colors more prominently. Draped in black, Nina fully embodies the essence of the Black Swan. Monochrome colors are constantly surrounding Nina throughout the film, from the walls in the dance hall, to the subtle things around her. This can be interpreted in a few ways. One is the contrast between the white and black swan, and how Nina is constantly reminded she needs to seamlessly embody both. It is also interpreted as the way Nina views the world, black and white, simply like a child. Once the final ballet takes place and Nina goes to perform the White Swan, she messes up and can't do it. She isn't the innocent, fragile girl she was at first, which makes embodying the White Swan impossible for her. She has broken out of her cage and there isn't any way for her to return. She then continues and embodies the Black Swan flawlessly. She becomes the role. It's perfect. Nina is the Black Swan, with no sense of identity. She takes on that role and embodies it to the fullest extent. After she hallucinates that she has stabbed Lily and realizes she's only stabbed herself, she doesn't seem to be in pain. It's represented as the opposite. Comparing Nina's final ballet as the Black Swan to her first in the film, two completely different characters are being depicted. After Nina's final jump, she falls onto the mattress and it switches into a white screen. The white screen symbolizes the light at the end of the tunnel, the final destination and the White Swan's suicide, just as the ballet director stated. Darren Aronofsky's Black Swan is a full-bore melodrama, told with passionate intensity, gloriously and darkly absurd. It centers on a performance by Natalie Portman that is nothing short of heroic, and mirrors the conflict of good and evil in Tchaikovsky's ballet Swan Lake. It is one thing to lose yourself in your art. Portman's ballerina loses her mind. Everything about classical ballet lends itself to excess. The art form is one of grand gesture, of the illusion of triumph over reality and even the force of gravity. Yet it demands from its performers years of rigorous perfectionism, the kind of physical and mental training that takes ascendancy over normal life. This conflict between the ideal and the reality is consuming Nina Sayers, Portman's character. Her life has been devoted to ballet. Was that entirely her choice? Her mother, Erica, Barbara Hershey, was a dancer once, and now dedicates her life to her daughter's career. They share a small apartment that feels sometimes like a refuge, sometimes like a cell. They hug and chatter like sisters. Something feels wrong. Nina dances in a company at New York's Lincoln Center, ruled by the autocratic Thomas Leroy, Vincent Cassel. The reach of his ego is suggested by his current season, which will remake the classics. Having cast off his former prima ballerina and lover, Beth McIntyre, Winona Ryder, he is now auditioning for a new lead. Swan Lake requires the lead to play opposite roles. Nina is clearly the best dancer for the White Swan. But Thomas finds her too perfect for the Black Swan. She dances with technique, not feeling. The film seems to be unfolding along lines that can be anticipated. There's tension between Nina and Thomas, and then Lily, Mila Kunis, a new dancer, arrives from the West Coast. She is all Nina is not: bold, loose, confident. She fascinates Nina, not only as a rival but even as a role model. Lily is, among other things, a clearly sexual being, and we suspect Nina may never have been on a date, let alone slept with a man. For her, Lily presents a professional challenge and a personal rebuke. Thomas, the Beast, is well known for having affairs with his dancers. Played with intimidating arrogance by Cassel, he clearly has plans for the virginal Nina. This creates a crisis in her mind. How can she free herself from the technical perfection and sexual repression enforced by her mother, while remaining loyal to their incestuous psychological relationship? No backstage ballet story can be seen without The Red Shoes, 1948, coming into mind. If you've never seen it, of course eventually you will. In the character of Thomas, Aronofsky and Cassel evoke Boris Lermontov, Anton Walbrook, the impresario in that film, whose autocratic manner masks a deep possessiveness. And in Nina, there is a version of Moira Shearer's ingenue, so driven to please. Black Swan will remind some viewers of Aronofsky's previous film, The Wrestler. Both show single-minded professionalism in the pursuit of a career, leading to the destruction of personal lives. I was reminded also of Aronofsky's brilliant debut with Pi, 1998, about a man driven mad by his quest for the universal mathematical language. For that matter, his The Fountain, 2007, was about a man who seems to conquer time and space. Aronofsky's characters make no little plans. The main story supports of Black Swan are traditional, backstage rivalry, artistic jealousy, a great work of art mirrored in the lives of those performing it. Aronofsky drifts eerily from those reliable guidelines into the mind of Nina. She begins to confuse boundaries. The film opens with a dream, and it becomes clear that her dream life is contiguous with her waking one. Aronofsky and Portman follow this fearlessly where it takes them. Portman's performance is a revelation from this actress who was a 13-year-old charmer in Beautiful Girls, 1996. She has never played a character this obsessed before, and never faced a greater physical challenge. She prepared by training for 10 months. Somehow she goes over the top and yet stays in character, even at the extremes. You don't catch her acting. The other actors are like dance partners holding her aloft. Barbara Hershey provides a perfectly calibrated performance as a mother whose love is real, whose shortcomings are not signaled, whose own perfectionism has all been focused on the creation of her daughter. The tragedy of Nina, and of many young performers and athletes, is that perfection in one area of life has led to sacrifices in many of the others. At a young age, everything becomes focused on pleasing someone, a parent, a coach, a partner, and somehow it gets wired in that the person can never be pleased. One becomes perfect in every area except for life itself. It's traditional in many ballet-based dramas for a summing up to take place in a bravura third act. Black Swan has a beauty. All of the themes of the music and life, all of the parallels of story and ballet, all of the confusion of reality and dream come together in a grand exhilaration of towering passion. There is really only one place this can take us, and it does. If I were you, I wouldn't spend too much time trying to figure out exactly what happens in practical terms. Lots of people had doubts about the end of The Red Shoes, too. They were wrong, but they did. By now, we can all appreciate that when you watch a Darren Aronofsky film, you won't leave the film feeling the same as you entered it, yet. This was the case when I watched Black Swan, a film about ballet. You'd be forgiven for thinking that a film about ballet would be bloody boring. However, then you'd be quickly unforgiven for thinking a film from Aronofsky, bar Noah, would be boring, because it bloody well ain't, son. That being said, the first half hour were pretty uneventful, and unnerving for all the wrong reasons. Natalie Portman, as leading woman-child Nina Sayers, was really quiet and just a bit weird. I feel equally that this was both the filmmaker's intention and an accident. If it was the filmmaker's intention, well done, I guess. If it was an accident, then it was one on the part of the actress, who somehow won an Oscar for the role. Around this point, I was struggling to see what all the fuss was about this film, quite unimpressed. Now, what I'm about to say may be very untrustworthy, especially from a 15-year-old's point of view, but it was around the lesbian sex scene when the film got really good. Darren Aronofsky's tragic psychodrama Black Swan puts ballet onto a dark stage of obsession and shocking imagery. Laced with overtones of sexual repression, paranoia, and body horror, this adult fairy tale comes rich with metaphors that are easily read but no less impactful for their straightforwardness. Though it resists clear exposition, the narrative unfolds with twists and turns that are sometimes predictable yet always dramatically significant. Made with all the bold visual style and narrative daring that one expects from Aronofsky, it proves to be his most ambitious and emotionally satisfying film thus far. The film marks a step forward in Aronofsky's career, employing his powerful sense of the visual from Requiem for a Dream and The Fountain, and he combines that with the dramatic consequence of The Wrestler. The result feels like something between Powell and Pressburger's The Red Shoes and Roman Polanski's Repulsion, in that the film presents a backstage ballet melodrama that takes place within the twisted psyche of the protagonist. Our perspective is that of a lead dancer whose sanity quickly comes into question, as her connection to her dancing drives her to evident hallucinations, which become more obvious, more visceral, and more dangerous as her psychological transformation manifests. Natalie Portman gives an incredible performance as Nina Sayers, a young ballerina struggling for perfection to appease her company's impresario, Thomas Leroy, the splendid Vincent Cassel. Nina wins the lead role of the Swan Queen in Leroy's new production of Swan Lake with her technical skill, which makes her ideal for the innocent white swan role, but she lacks the sensuality and spontaneity of the role's alter ego, the Black Swan. Leroy attempts to release Nina's passions so that she might unlock her repressed sexuality and channel it into her performance, but she remains difficult to coax. And so, Nina grows obsessed with the idea that Leroy will select someone else from the company to replace her, such as Lily, Mila Kunis, whose grasp of sexuality seems effortless in comparison. At home, Nina's domineering mother, Barbara Hershey, treats her like a fragile child who will break under too much pressure, hinting at past psychological problems that would make Nina incapable of being on her own. Filled with stuffed animals and a pink color scheme, Nina's room shows evidence that her mother has sheltered her, and maybe rightfully so. Scratches appear on Nina's back, broken skin on her fingers, and bumps under her skin that may be black feathers emerging from within as though she was literally becoming her part. Some of these physical signs are imagined, while others are not. As she grows further into her role, Nina's paranoia takes over, and she anticipates betrayal at every turn, thrusting herself into violent, even self-destructive resolutions. But since everything we see comes from Nina's perspective, we cannot trust our eyes, rather, we must trust only how the film cleverly links us with Nina's mental state, unstable and unsettling though it may be. Aronofsky shoots almost exclusively with handheld cameras in intimate close-ups that force a connection between the viewer and the film's characters. This approach heightens the emotional response but places a distance between the viewer and our appreciation of the technical dancing. Only a few wide shots allow us to appreciate the ballet sequences themselves in their entirety, as Aronofsky prefers keeping the frame tight on his protagonist's expressions, her emotions reeling as the camera rotates around her. Much of the action occurs on Portman's face, her every gesture revealing another insecurity or fear. In some ways, Aronofsky's choice to employ so many close-ups was wise, in that the connection between Nina and the audience remains undeniable, almost tangible. He uses several shots of mirror reflections, suggesting Nina's increasing duality and fragmentation. Still, the viewer never gathers an appreciation for the beauty of dance, the artistry, or the physical grace and toils behind it. More close-ups show us Nina's open wounds, some made through dance, yet Aronofsky fails to develop in the viewer an appreciation for the art form. Given these choices, Black Swan becomes more about Nina's crumbling psychology than dance, whereas it is dance that propels her to such extreme behavior. It would seem crucial that we understand both. What's more, Portman trained for months to learn ballet, so few dance doubles were needed during shooting. Although the viewer can hardly take full notice of Portman's efforts because Aronofsky so rarely pulls back for a panoramic view of the ballet sequences. These are mere preferences from a formal perspective, however, and hold little bearing on the impact of the film from an emotional standpoint, which by the conclusion sweeps the viewer away with its potent metaphors and crushing last scene. The film makes an obvious companion piece to Aronofsky's last release, The Wrestler, which offered a character study through the backdrop of professional wrestling. Shot in a similar grainy, really their style, both films fall on performers who punish themselves through their art, though wrestling is surely the low art to ballet's high art. More sophisticated and intricate than that film, Black Swan warrants a profound response both from its stark melodramatic turns and from the sheer authority behind its artistic ambitions. This is an impressive work that may lack the affection that The Red Shoes has for dance, but through its confronting visual intensity never fails to be evocative. I don't know why, but it's not the reason you're thinking, yeah, dirty basted. Though the scene itself was nothing to frown at, I'd give it an 8/10. It served as an earmark to indicate that the rest of the film was absolutely fantastic. You know, when I snarkily said somehow when talking about Portman winning an Oscar for her role, I was only leading you on, weren't I? Flippin' L, I am a joker, ain't I? She really came into her own after the scene, as what followed was surreal mind trip after Nina had been influenced by the darker desires of Lily, played by Mila Kunis, who she believes to be trying to steal her role. Wait a minute, have I explained the plot yet? No. Damn it. Give us a sec then. Black Swan is a film about a sheltered, dedicated ballet dancer, Portman, gaining the lead role in Swan Lake, playing the white and black swan, get it cause of the title. After her being pushed to pursue her darker side by her instructor, Thomas, Vincent Cassel, her mind snaps and she begins a downward spiral towards perfection, all the while being rivaled by Lily Kunis. Bloody hell, sorry about the lateness. Whether is was seeing this character who, until now, was extremely innocent, still living with her mum, now being an utter rebel, or something else, it had a powerful effect on me as the viewer. That was why Natalie Portman won that Oscar, and, I must say, it was some of the absolute best character development I've seen in a very long time. Supporting Portman to great effect, and forming an excellent backbone for the film is Vincent Cassel, as Thomas. The key to his performance was how my reaction to his character shifted throughout the film. At first, I thought he was creepy. 'Cause he was, mang. He was rubbing her and stuff while they were dancing, it was pretty creepy. However, after a lot of development, he almost became a sort of mentor, maybe even a father figure. That sounds weird, I can appreciate that. You're probably thinking, what kind of father figures did you have? None like that, thanks for asking. Just trust me, it was odd. But good. Accompanying Cassel in the supporting cast is Mila Kunis as the aforementioned Lily. Her character was also quite oddly motivated. It seems through the eyes of Nina she's the antagonist, however, when the Nina filter lifts, she just trying to help her out. I think Lily is the perfect example of how the film's direction is successful in toying with your mind, not to mention perfectly, almost comfortably, played by Kunis. Every once in a blue moon, I'll write about the cinematography and sound design. Woody Alia caught that? The moon is blue tonight. On a technical level, this film is close to flawless, as you'd expect from a film of this caliber. The score accompanying the scenes is that of a fairytale-like nature, running parallel to the plot, which I thought was a nice touch. The sharp violin strikes and fantastical feeling really contradicts the camera work. The camera work, contrasting the soundtrack quite dramatically, was gritty and realistic, following the trend with Oscar-baiting dramas at the moment, with a lot of uneasy shakiness, emphasizing the main character's psyche. On top of this, the amount of surreal imagery in the film is staggering. Scenes involving self-mutilation and other lovely themes really were uncomfortable to watch, but were pivotal to the plot and increased the atmosphere and experience tenfold, sometimes even reminding me of The Shining. However, there was also a lot of subliminal imagery in the lighting which I also somehow picked up on, whether it was purposeful or not. It really did make me think, a rare occurrence. Overall, Black Swan is a deserved Oscar winner, be it only performance-wise. It delivers in the psychological thriller genre like a mother and is chock-a-block with underlying messages that make it more of a case study than a film, which isn't a criticism. That being said, however, it does suffer from a lackluster first act which fails to serve as an indicator for what was to come, which was nail-biting, skin-stripping, feather-growing thriller with an absolutely jaw-dropping finale. Darren Aronofsky's Black Swan, starring Natalie Portman, examines the physically demanding art of ballet while experimenting with themes such as drama and horror to create an enthralling experience to haunt the audience without following the established traits of those genres. As a result, we have a relentlessly entertaining film that with skillful manipulation of mirrors urges the viewer to question the reality of the events on display, that provides a dichotomy which makes the film persistently captivating. This technique utilized by Darren Aronofsky is significant of the film's central theme of the duality of oneself. This theme is embodied by the innocent Nina Sayers, Natalie Portman, having to represent the character of the Black Swan, a creature of lustful and impulse desire after she receives the coveted role in Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake. The personality is antithetical to her own that closely mirrors that of the White Swan. Nina is coerced by her lubricious director Thomas Leroy, Vincent Cassel, to discover the side of her personality that dives into progressively iniquitous depths while living under the shadow of her inescapably obsessive mother, Erica, Barbara Hershey. When delving deeper into these depths, Nina loses grasp on reality. Mila Kunis Lily, who is a significant character who dials back the surrealism and grounds the narrative into reality once more due to a calculated performance and script. Regularly, Lily is observant of Nina's declining perception of reality and provides an essential derisive perspective on the matter. As a sexually repressed woman, Lily not only draws her back to reality but draws Nina closer towards adulthood and independence. The film confidently blurs the line between thrilling and horrific scenes, where a palpable sense of horror is felt primarily in the intense scenes of bodily self-harm. Due to the excellent visuals and editing, these scenes are impactful with the use of the juxtaposition of black and white, blatantly portraying the theme of darkness against innocence, thus implying good vs evil. However, there is an underlying notion of ambiguity incorporated by the director through the use of color in the costume and production design reliant on what circumstances the characters are in. Also, Mark Heyman, Andres Heinz and John McLaughlin's script must be commended for inviting the audience to question the film and seamlessly blending Nina's own story with that of Swan Lake itself. Black Swan is a cataclysmic view of perfection and the devotion that is displayed by Nina to achieve it. The surreal and terrifying aspects shown through the protagonist is an incredulous surprise to someone like myself who knew very little about the film upon viewing. Certainly it's an enthrallingly emotive and visceral experience. Black Swan is a raw and beautifully brutal film with the masterful use of pacing as the film slowly and gradually builds to a final act that is endowed with tension as Tchaikovsky's score coalesces with Aronofsky's narrative that intensifies into a stunningly devastating climax. The 5 films of director Darren Aronofsky have covered more conceptual and visually idiomatic ground than the entire careers of filmmakers with 5 times the output, a surpassingly cheap and grimy thriller about a paranoid mathematician, a whirling 2-hour music video about drug addiction, a CGI-addled fantasia on the meaning of time, mortality, and identity, and social realist biography of an athlete's one last chance. What has combined them all is the grandeur of obsession. If you are an important character in an Aronofsky film, it is very likely that there is one thing you want above all others, and in pursuit of that thing will sacrifice every relationship and comfort you know. And here we have Black Swan, which is both a new genre and mostly a new visual style. It's the story of a sexually repressed ballerina going nuts under the pressure of having to dance Odette/Odile in Swan Lake, filmed in a handheld verite style in a similar manner to Aronofsky's last feature, The Wrestler, but with a whole added dollop of the creepiest crawliest body horror of 2010, and metaphorically laden psycho-terror that reminded me, if anything, of Roman Polanski's Repulsion, and is otherwise the most Aronofsky movie yet. Obsession is its heart and soul, its bread and butter. Specifically, the obsession with perfection, both aesthetic, the ballet, and moral. The heroine's mother instilled abhorrence of sexual impurity. The ballerina in question is Nina Sayers, Natalie Portman, the daughter of a former dancer named Erica, Barbara Hershey, who gave up her own career when she became pregnant, and has become quite the stage mother in the interim, closely monitoring every minute detail of Nina's life and driving the younger woman, not so young, in her middle or late 20s, and still living with her mother in a bedroom without a locking door and too many tacky ballet-themed stuffed toys to count, to neurosis. We get the understanding that there have been other dark moments in Nina's life wherein the pressure of being Erica's pride and joy led her to acts of self-mutilation. Having caught the eye of the lascivious impresario Thomas Leroy, Vincent Cassel, Nina is cast as the bipartite lead of Tchaikovsky's ballet, The White Swan Odette, representing virginal purity, and The Black Swan Odile, representing carnality. Lacking the requisite sexual history to convincing play Odile as smoldering and seductive as Thomas demands, Nina is driven to frustration and then worse, particularly in light of the new core member Lily, Mila Kunis, who won an acting award at Venice, who is raw and physical in all the places that Nina is fragile and chaste, and whose stand-in work as Odile is precisely the sensual ravishment that Thomas is looking for. As Nina goes crazy under the demands of her director, her own sense of personal failure, her mother's smiling harpy wickedness, and her uncertain feelings towards the now friendly, now scheming Lily, Black Swan falls steadily apart, yoking itself more and more to the hallucinations and waking nightmares that begin to define her perception of the world. It is, by all means, a grubby melodrama, with loving attention paid to such details as Nina's tentative masturbation sessions and her terrifying visions of a doppelganger who might be Lily lurking and waiting to kill her, and the inexplicable scars and physical deformities afflicting the body that she views with something akin to visceral loathing. But I, for one, generally prefer Aronofsky in his grubby phase, and now is as good a time to admit at any that even when I admire his work the most, I find his films generally unlikable. His aesthetic choices strike me as no choices at all, but a whirlwind of activity, tossing every idea that comes into his head in front of the camera, simply because it excites him. And while they all have energy to spare, Aronofsky's projects are thus as much annoying for their obvious squandered potential as they are exhilarating for what they do accomplish, which is always considerable. This approach probably works better in a horror film than in the other genres the director has attacked, and while, make no mistake, Black Swan is never going to end up on the shelves next to Black Sunday, the moments of greatest impact in the movie are almost exclusively the most classically horrific. As Nina grows certain that she is herself transforming into the Black Swan, the rippling of CGI goose flesh across her body, and the spontaneous eruptions of blood on her hands and feet, one particularly bracing scene witnesses Nina tearing a long strip of skin off her finger, or so she thinks, have an intensely unsettling effect, more genuinely upsetting than anything an American horror movie has been able to come up with in several years. And, it must be said, Aronofsky is just as willing to indulge in cheap tricks. The number of false jump scares is unforgivable for a movie with this kind of art house credibility, though the body horror much outweighs the slasher movie theatrics, as does the good old-fashioned this isn't right tension, omnipresent in the film from its dramatic opening scene, a dream in which Nina as the White Swan is menaced by the ballet's villain von Rothbart, skulking in the inky shadows surrounding the dancer. And if Black Swan were content to remain a grubby horror film, I guess I wouldn't have a word to say against it, but its dives into psychological investigation are so damned important, and so mostly flat, that it tends to suck some of the energy away from the very real successes on screen, just like something has in every other Aronofsky film. For starters, the use of symbolism is about as subtle as a grand piano to the head. The black/white imagery is of course inherent in Swan Lake itself, but there is a material difference between ballet, the most abstract of all narrative forms, and cinema, nominally the least abstract. At any rate, while the color coding is at times clever and at times haunting, I don't know what value it serves the movie that every single time we see Mila Kunis until the very end, she's draped all in black. The central idea of the ballerina, every cliched little girl's dream job, and an opportunity for the repressed Nina to exert control over her body, is underdeveloped except as a plot hook. It helps not at all that Portman and Kunis, though game, are not as good at ballet as the film suggests they are, or requires them to be, with the film not even exploring the character's milieu as thoroughly as the wrestler did. Frankly, I don't know that the director, working from a rather programmatic script by Mark Heyman, Andres Heinz, and John McLaughlin, really cares that much about Nina, who is treated very much as an object and not as a personality in his framing. The famed Aronofsky back of the head shot is much in evidence, and who is relegated in the story to an entirely reactive character, which gives Portman almost nothing to work with, leaving the actress stranded in a whole lot of variations on the same basic confused and scared face. Until the last 20 minutes, anyway, the only time that the film opens up whatsoever and the dramatic force of the plot catches up to the rich visual style that is so much more apparently interesting to the filmmakers. And by all means, Black Swan looks amazing. Matthew Libatique's harsh Super 16 cinematography is one of the great achievements of the year, plunging blacks and blinding whites and not a whole lot else, with grains the size of $50 adding a thick veneer of texture that makes the film seem at once more real and more abstract, like a tactile fairy tale. Certainly, Black Swan is a fairy tale if it's anything. It's a damn chilly film, though with little genuine insight into the human condition and no interest in providing such insight, only a problem because the film sets it up in such unmissable terms that it shall be very much a character study. I suppose there's something compelling in its depiction of a mind descending into utter madness, viscerally if for no other reason, but it's just not that strong as a vision of the crazy artist, or the sexually repressed woman. Even as a story of the ballerina broken by her desire to achieve perfection, it says nothing that wasn't said with infinitely more success in the 62-year-old The Red Shoes. Yet there's no denying that the thing gets deep under your skin. It gets there in just about the least reputable way it could, but it certainly gets there. Ballet horror/drama/psychosexual thriller Black Swan revels and positively gets off on a highly pleasing central paradox. It's as elegant and overblown as ballet itself. We follow socially awkward, repressed ballet dancer Nina, Natalie Portman, competing for a much coveted leading role in a New York Ballet's new production of Swan Lake. Between deliberately, physically, hurting herself and being berated by her harridan mother, Barbara Hershey's Erica, Nina manages to stave off competition from outgoing ballet queen Beth McIntyre, Winona Ryder, and new girl on the block Lily, Mila Kunis, to the role. However, when her wish comes true, she gets more than she bargained for. This is not least from the production's director Vincent Cassel's Thomas Leroy, a notoriously manipulative womanizer. Yet it's more than that. The role proves the trigger for her unraveling. Nina believes she is being targeted by jealous dancers, increases in her self-harming and, strangely of all, believes she is physically transforming. But is this all in her head? From the opening sequence in which fragile-looking Nina is starkly lit on an empty stage, only to be assaulted by a fellow, rather terrifying, dancer, or, possibly, monster, you know this ain't going to be The Red Shoes. While Powell and Pressburger's dance sequences were shown in stately long shot, Aronofsky gets right in there in agonizing close-up, revealing the painful physical hardships, bitchy hair-pulling and bittersweet emotional consequences of fame. It's also, quite possibly, a horror film playing inside its central character's head. As Nina's fantasy of becoming a ballet leading lady comes true, things get all Cronenbergian. Nina believes she may be turning into a swan, She is getting marks on her back, and sees bumps on her skin. She also has to confront her repressed nature. Half of her role is to take on the character of the Black Swan, the more sexual, seductive part she will have ever played. This leads her through a whole host of new experiences, from the titillating to the terrifying. Ambitious then, but director Aronofsky isn't one known to shy away from extremes. And the movie follows through its theatricality in its off-stage antics. Shock and awe is shot through the movie like a message in a stick of seaside rock. Most satisfyingly, the ending neither confirms nor denies the ongoing discussion between fantasy and reality. Aronofsky has encouraged the actors to, and gets the boldest performance from Natalie Portman since her debut in Leon. Winona Ryder is also strangely energized, and she scores a number of highly memorable scenes in the movie. But the revelation here is Barbara Hershey. Hershey has been on and off the screen for a while, but here she reminds us of why she raised eyebrows in 80s movies like Beaches. In many ways, her wide-eyed portrayal of a suffocating parent is similar to Piper Laurie's mother role in Carrie, surely the epitome of control-freak matriarchy. If audiences can deal with the outrageous plot developments, the hyper-real tone and the unsettling beauty, Black Swan may well prove the calling card for the best director of a generation. It's incredibly accomplished stuff. Darren Aronofsky originally intended to make a single film about a love affair between a wrestler and a ballerina. That didn't work out as planned, and so The Wrestler, 2008, was made first, with Black Swan following 2 years later. Despite being divided into separate stories, the films remain as companion pieces. The Ring and The Stage are entirely different worlds, but the films examine a common theme: the destruction of oneself for the sake of performance. Aronofsky tackles the idea with a more edgy approach this time round, but there is no doubt that the two films are opposite sides of the same coin. Ballet dancer Natalie Portman, is determined to land the leading role in her company's production of Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake. Her innocence, elegance, and delicacy make her a perfect candidate for the White Swan, one half of the character. The same traits prevent her from playing the titular Black Swan, which is aggressive, seductive, and dark. As Nina struggles to embody both halves of the character, she begins to lose her grip on reality. Things are made worse by an oppressive mother, an imposing director, and a talented rival who threatens to snatch the role away. Portman does a phenomenal job as Nina. She plays her emotions and her frailty with such conviction that her mental disintegration feels natural and credible. Her dedication to the role is obvious, shrinking down to unhealthy proportions and training tirelessly for a year transformed her into a proper ballerina. Even more impressively, she manages to act and keep up with the crazy choreography at the same time, doing both so flawlessly that an Oscar is inevitable. The camera work by Matthew Libatique perfectly communicates the frantic nature of the story. Mirrors are used creatively, and the liberal use of the close-up, especially during the dancing, creates a claustrophobic atmosphere that complements the film's sinister nature. Clint Mansell's score is a brilliantly creepy reworking of Tchaikovsky's pieces. It is an effective composition, perfectly reflecting the film's mix of beauty and menace. Somewhat disappointingly, the first half of Black Swan is a little slow, with an overemphasis on setting up the story. There is also perhaps slightly too great a focus on the dancing. However, the pace allows for the mood to build and build until a truly insane final act that delivers a satisfying payoff. The works of Cronenberg, Polanski, and Lynch, all of them masters of uncomfortable cinema, echo throughout. Black Swan combines the body horror of The Fly, the paranoia of The Tenant, and the surrealism of Mulholland Drive in a blend of menace so varied that it keeps the audience genuinely uneasy throughout. Yet Aronofsky does not rely on others to hold up his film. He has taken the tools crafted by others and created for himself a refreshingly demented film. In his own way, he combines beauty and perfection with madness and paranoia. Ballet is meant to be graceful, but the mood that Aronofsky creates is one of frenzy. There are scary films, and there are beautiful films, and it is in the juxtaposition of the two that Aronofsky triumphs. Over the years, Aronofsky has built himself a solid reputation for making films that are difficult to put in a box, and Black Swan is no different. It doesn't know if it wants to be beautiful or ugly, so it is a mash-up of both. It aims to seduce and repulse at the same time, and it succeeds. Never has a film been so simultaneously elegant and vulgar. It is uncomfortable and occasionally nasty, and yet it is one of the most exhilarating in recent cinema. Darren Aronofsky's 2008 film, The Wrestler, had the kind of grip a movie about wrestling ought to have. It packed a punch, because it was rooted in realism, a realism that sometimes went beyond real into the realm of the surreal. But the story of a wrestler, whose considerable talent and courage was not enough to save him from a life bent on self-destruction, kept a hold on its audience even up to and after its overreaching finale. The story and the character, played magnificently by Mickey Rourke, had me too transfixed, too engrossed, and, yes, too resigned to the hero's fate to let the disappointment over Rourke's inevitable fall follow me out of the theater. I felt as invigorated as I felt saddened. The fighter's effort was certainly worth the try. I had no such feeling as I watched Aronofsky's new film, The Black Swan. The movie has a remarkable ending. It's not unlike the ending of The Wrestler. Both end with an arm-spreading dive. The last scenes of The Black Swan comprise a visual tour de force whose dark depths and hyperkinetic spirals are almost a match for Tchaikovsky's haunting score. Unfortunately, the film falls apart long before the closing segment, and those final moments don't generate quite enough steam to save the movie. Everything that precedes the ending is dense, claustrophobic, and weighed down by so much high-minded cynicism and pretentious artifice that it never gets off the ground. That's deadly for a movie about dancing which ought to be light on its feet. Nina, Natalie Portman, is a member of the ballet corps of a fictional company that bears more than a passing resemblance to the New York City Ballet with its cutting-edge artistry, hard-driving competition, unquenchable thirst for funding, and titillating backstage drama. An aging ballerina named Beth, played in grandiose train wreck fashion by Winona Ryder, is a brilliant dancer. She's temperamental and unpredictable. That's okay. She has aged a bit. That's not okay. The dance company director, Thomas Leroy, played with Mephistophelian charm and cunning by French actor, Vincent Cassel, wants to do yet another production of Swan Lake, but this time he wants to strip it of its bloated sentimentality and strip it down to its bare essentials. Sure, he's full of hot air, but Cassel makes him and the project he's toting believable, even interesting. He wants to cast a newer, younger Swan, one that he can mold and control both on and off the stage. He sees something in Nina that every impresario in every backstage movie sees in his ingenue. Kid, you're going out there a chorus girl, but you're coming back a star. I apologize for lumping ballerinas with Broadway hoofers, but the hoofer's mark is where the Black Swan lands, or drops itself, with more of a thud than a point. Cassel trains Nina, but he also seduces her. The other dancers warn her that he's a creep, but Nina disregards them, because Leroy is a genius. For Nina, her impresario's artistry and high IQ trump his selfishness and lagging moral compass. She'll make a bargain with the devil to get the plum roll that only he can place within her reach. She's also a sad, fatherless child who seems to be in desperate need of a paternal figure. Nina seems to have no friends inside or outside the corps. Another dancer, Lily, Mila Kunis, tries to befriend her, but only as a means of usurping her and stealing the part of the Swan. Lily does little to conceal her intent, but Nina nonetheless plays along. Lily takes her out for drinks the night before a performance, spikes Nina's drink with a drug. Nina sees her do it, sets her up with two unseemly guys whom she has sex with, and attempts to seduce Nina herself. I found myself wondering if, indeed, Lily wouldn't have actually been a much better Black Swan. Tchaikovsky's Evil Bird has a sting to match its song. Nina has the song down, but she can't find the sting. Lily has it in spades. With the Nina-Lily relationship, Aronofsky has borrowed another ingenue story from the Hollywood Files, the one about the ambitious unknown who waits in the wings and is ready to step on and over the star, in order to become the new star, a tale told best in the Joseph Mankiewicz 1950 film, All About Eve. The Black Swan does not hold up under the spotlight of that earlier classic. In All About Eve, the aging theater star, Margot Channing, Bette Davis, and the relentlessly ambitious rising one, Eve Harrington, Anne Baxter, were equally matched in star power and star venom. Nina, on the other hand, is overshadowed by everyone around her. She can't find an opening anywhere. Several reviewers have called Aronofsky's film a cross between Eve and the 1948 British film, The Red Shoes. Swan takes elements from both movies, but those elements don't gel. I thought I was watching a camp parody of those classics. The more Swan dragged on, the more I longed for the originals. The Red Shoes is still the quintessential movie about ballet. It's always a hard sell to get an audience to understand how a ballet dancer is able to give up everything, comfort, love, even life itself, for the sake of what appears to be an ethereal art, but the symbol of those seemingly innocent, inanimate scarlet slippers taking on a life of their own, and taking over the life of their owner puts the glory and the danger of that dream into clear perspective. Victoria Page, Moira Shearer, the ballerina in the Red Shoes, lived and worked under the spell of an impresario, but she had her own life as well. She had fallen in love with a composer, and she had to decide between marriage and a career as a dancer. Nina is a young woman who seems to have nothing to live for when the curtain comes down. Her home is a small Upper West Side apartment that she shares with her single mother, a failed ballerina who smothers her daughter with childlike affection and barely concealed hostility. Barbara Hershey plays the mother, and she gives the best performance in the film. You can see in her face how pride and resentment go hand in hand, and how she disdains her own eye for talent, the eye that lets her see that her daughter has the talent that she had always craved for herself. Natalie Portman is getting all the kudos for her performance as Nina. She deserves them. She gives a good performance, and she dances quite well, but Hershey is the real actress. I can't put into words what makes a great performance, but I can point to Hershey's here, and to those in several of her other films, and say that's one. Aronofsky has saddled his film with a lot of psychological, you could also say psycho, baggage. Nina's dilemmas are harder to figure out than a Rubik's Cube, because you're never quite sure if something is really happening or if that something is only an illusion that goes on inside Nina's unbalanced head. Nina has a life that exists between 2 points, the rehearsal room balance bar and her pink and white bedroom that is full of stuffed animals. Who wouldn't be neurotic going back and forth between those two extremes, on the New York City subway, no less? She imagines a lot of things, and it gets harder and harder to distinguish between the real and the imagined. The plot is not rooted in anything that can grab you or make you feel for Nina, the way you could feel for Mickey Rourke's desperate, but very real, character in The Wrestler. Nina's transformation from baby doll to temptress coincides with her move from the real world to a fantasy one. After a while it's hard to distinguish one world from the other, and, ultimately, it's hard to feel anything for her. Does Nina really dance the Black Swan? Does she kill her rival? Does she wound herself when she goes on a rampage in her dressing room? Does the prince really drop her at the end of the first act? Whose fault was that? And what's the fallout? No heads rolling? I guess not, but at this point my own head is rolling, and reeling. I wonder if I'm going crazy. 2. And that, I believe, is what Aronofsky has in mind. He doesn't want to just take us inside his characters' heads, he wants us to live inside that head, to feel the pain, do the drug, take the dive. I have never been one attracted to Natalie Portman much past her obvious physical beauty. With the exception of early turns in The Professional, aka Leon, and Beautiful Girls, her performance style has always struck me as perfect to the point of being brittle. So Darren Aronofsky's use of her in Black Swan stands out as an astute bit of exploitation, mining Portman's own flaws to inform her role as an overambitious ballerina. Indeed, one could apply this to the entire ensemble cast of this thriller mashing up the ballet movie with the psychological horror film. Portman's ballerina is a rising ingenue given the role of the White and Black Swan in Swan Lake. But her director, Vincent Cassel, Mesrin, Killer Instinct, is open about his doubts that she can pull it off. She is technically adept enough to pull off the role of the perfect White Swan, yet lacks the passion which characterizes the darker Black Swan. This puts her in competition with new dancer, Mila Kunis, the Book of Eli, whose enthusiasm is infectious, in an almost literal sense it turns out. Since Kunis joined the troupe, Portman catches glimpses of herself everywhere she goes, a double sometimes reflected even in Kunis' visage. The idea of a doppelganger representing a protagonist's break from reality and a sort of scapegoat to which she can attach all of her troubles recalls the Edgar Allan Poe story, William Wilson and Lewis Malle's creepy 1969 adaptation of it for a segment in Histo Ayres Extraordinaires. On film, the icily handsome Alain Delon plays the immoral Wilson and his identically named double, a conscientious man who seems to exist merely to push the evil Wilson's acts out into the open. Just as Wilson blames his double for the scrapes he gets himself into, Portman's ingenue resists unleashing her repressed sexuality by imagining a dark twin which does it for her. The seductive Kunis seems to be the catalyst for the birth of this second persona, with pills and sex blurring the lines for Portman and allowing her to cast Kunis as her twisted alter ego. Portman even imagines making love to herself during a steamy erotic encounter with Kunis, who quickly becomes an unwitting catch-all for Portman's repressed desires and resentments. Roman Polanski explored sexual repression as the cause of a personality schism in Repulsion, 1965, where he employed the chilly beauty of Catherine Deneuve as a distancing device, allowing the viewer to coldly witness her spiral downwards into insanity. In Black Swan, Aronofsky alternately keeps us at arm's length from Portman and places us within her head. While she pirouettes her way through practice, DP Matthew Libatique whirls the camera exhilaratingly, sweeping us away and allowing us to experience the allure this painfully exacting art form holds for our heroine. Other times, we are allowed to see the obsession creeping into Portman's manic behavior, as the physical and mental demands of her rise to stardom start manifesting themselves in bizarre scars on her back which hint at a history of cutting. One scene, in which Portman enters the walk-up she shares with her mother, Barbara Hershey, only to find a roomful of abstracted portraits laughing at her, is the most pointed evocation of Polanski's film, recalling the scene in which Deneuve is tormented by arms reaching out to her from her own apartment's walls. But it is perhaps the most famous ballet film of all which serves as the greatest thematic influence to Black Swan. Its edgy take on one dancer's obsessive pursuit of perfection culminates in an impressionistic climax, which rivals the Red Shoes' emotional denouement, if not in romantic tragedy then at least in high-strung tension. In one respect, I'm surprised to admit it even surpasses it. Powell and Pressburger's The Red Shoes reaches its emotional crescendo midway through the film during Moira Shearer's 20-minute nightmarish dance sequence, leaving the film's end to feel merely anguished. Black Swan hits its most suspenseful moment in its finale, when Swan Lake is finally enacted. The effect is that of a catharsis which the viewer has sought through much of its anxiety-ridden story, leaving one breathless as the credits start to roll. When you've powered your way through 9 new movies within a week, it takes a lot to go back and sit through one of them again. While there have now been 3, the others being 127 Hours and Rare Exports, A Christmas Tale, it took the batshit insanity of Darren Aronofsky's Black Swan to force me back to see if it was as good a second time around, and I wound up loving the film even more upon revisiting it. Aronofsky has made a name for himself after his breakthrough at the 1998 Sundance Film Festival with Pi, thanks to his all-too-realistic depictions in Requiem for a Dream, which really put him on the map. And while his third feature outing, The Fountain, was considered a huge misstep, he brought back his A-game with a film of great intimacy and a few Oscar nods for its stars Mickey Rourke and Marisa Tomei with The Wrestler. While they have now been A-listed again, after seeing him back in deranged form with Black Swan, hopefully we see him nominated this year along with his superstar Natalie Portman. Nina Sayers, Portman, has big dreams of becoming the new star for Thomas Leroy's, Vincent Cassel, reimagining of Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake. While many find Thomas's choice to kick off his new season, he expects to strip it down, make it visceral and real. At first Thomas doesn't think Nina has the power to become the Black Swan by the end of the story, he is too well aware that she most definitely conveys the White Swan at least. When future rival Lily, Mila Kunis, arrives fresh off the plane from San Francisco, that's when Nina has to do some soul searching to figure out whether she has the guts to pull off the perfect performance and prove herself successor of the retiring Beth McIntyre, Winona Ryder. Natalie Portman sure has come a long way from the days of the professional or her cutesy turns in Anywhere But Here and Where the Heart Is. She's thankfully broadening her horizons from playing the epileptic girl next door, Garden State, a stripper, Closer, a foul-mouthed rapper in a Saturday Night Live digital short, The Bruised Ex-Girlfriend, Hotel Chevalier, or shaving her head and kicking ass V for Vendetta. She's finally becoming the standout actress critics and fans alike have spotted since 1994. Now whether she's next seen in her upcoming romantic/comedy No Strings Attached, a raunchy period comedy, Your Highness, or in next summer's blockbuster Thor, it's nice to see she's keeping things varied and not taking any time off. We can all use more Portman in our cinematic diet. And it's of particular note with Black Swan that she's bound to become one of Mr. Skin's most searched names after the bedroom scene she shares, first with herself, and then with Kunis after a drunken, drug-addled night out. Aronofsky fantastically blurs the lines between the film's reality and Nina's increasingly perverse fantasy is all part of the fun as events begin piling upon one another. Whether it's a did they/didn't they hook up between Nina and Lily or all the events of the denouement, everything is thrown into Aronofsky's pressure cooker, leaving the audience squirming to find out what's really going on. While Black Swan's ending may be quite similar to The Wrestlers, that film ended a little too ambiguously and left me with a bad aftertaste and a shrug of the shoulders. Here, screenwriters Mark Heyman, Andres Heinz, and John J. McLaughlin have given a fitful ending where everything finally adds up to the sum of its parts, and it's finally realized that what Thomas says about his version of Swan Lake is what everyone involved has decided to do with the film, and that is worthy of a standing ovation all in itself. Directed by Darren Aronofsky, the same man who gave us The Wrestler and Requiem for a Dream, Black Swan is a passionate, tension-filled suspense drama about a ballerina named Nina, Natalie Portman, who is chosen to play the much-coveted lead in New York Ballet Company's production, Swan Lake. The role calls for not just a perfect portrayal of the innocent White Swan, but also the much more difficult Black Swan. Although Nina performs the White Swan part faultlessly, she needs more time to perfect the more demanding role, the Black Swan. But as she struggled to get lost in this dark character and receives unsolicited help from the sexually charged Lily, Mila Kunis, she discovers more about her own dark side. Without a doubt, Natalie Portman nailed the role as if the film was made so she could have her first Academy Award. She was convincing as the innocent Nina, wanting to meet her mother's expectations and proving she deserves the part. She was also able to successfully transition to the rebellious woman, who would do everything to keep the role. But of course, the film is not all about Natalie Portman. Darren Aronofsky was able to build the tension in a way that it will never let you go minutes into the film. The moment Nina breaks her toenail after an emotionally painful pirouette, the heaviness of the film shoots up and there's no coming down. It was actually a little difficult to watch because you get to feel for every character and you also get confused as to what is real and what is not. The film also succeeds in pouring sensuality and passion all over the film. It is intriguing, addictive, sexy. Not that I enjoyed the hot lesbian action in it, but it was well shot. Haha. Some elements are cliché, such as the overwhelming pink in Nina's room. It was like spoon-feeding me that Nina likes pink and is therefore the innocent type. Even the mirror scenes, symbolic as they are, kind of feel redundant. Black Swan is an effective thriller. Nevertheless, it would also be interesting to see how it would turn out had Aronofsky steered away from psychological suspense and instead make it a subtle psychological drama. The relationship between Nina and her mother demands more screen time. Their chemistry is phenomenal and their scenes together are much more intense than the whole stage and backstage sequence towards the end of the film. But regardless of what it could have been, Black Swan is a fine film as is. The film draws the audience into the paranoid, obsessed psyche of a ballerina who has a lot to prove to everyone and to herself. And whether the character successfully becomes the Black Swan or not, Natalie Portman has just become the actress to beat with her performance in this film. When awards season rolls around, and even for months beforehand, we're subjected to a lot of hyperbole, where every picture is breathtakingly touted as best of the year, and every performance is called Oscar-worthy. More often than not, this is a lot of hogwash, but sometimes it turns out a particular piece of work has warranted the buzz. One such example is Natalie Portman's portrayal of a ballerina whose sanity slowly unravels in Darren Aronofsky's Black Swan, opening Friday, December 3rd. Nina Portman gets the coveted lead role in a NYC Ballet Company's production of Swan Lake, but pressure from a director, Vincent Cassel, who expresses doubts about her ability to play both the white and black swans, plus the presence of a young passionate dancer, Mila Kunis, who seems to know a little if not all about Eve, causes Nina to become paranoid about being replaced. She goes to extremes to keep the part, to make herself perfect, though she's really descending into madness. Portman has done edgy and dark before but has never been this effective. When she shaved her head for V for Vendetta, it seemed like a stunt, a too jarring attempt to break away from her nice girl image, and the result was unconvincing. But it's completely believable for the actress to inhabit Nina, with her natural grace, lithe, though much thinner than usual, body and swan-like neck. Her pro-level dancing, Portman did much of it herself, seals the deal. But then, just as the swan splits into two selves, Portman shows us that the sweet pretty exterior is just a cover-up for Nina's disturbing inner core. Sure, staying on top in the cutthroat world of professional ballet must be stressful, but Nina goes over the edge and Portman makes her mental deterioration terrifying. Nina's instability makes the movie quite suspenseful at times, for we never know what she'll do or how far she'll go. She can have wild sex one minute and fly into a rage the next. She can be joyful and fall apart at the same time. Much has been said about Annette Bening's performance in The Kids Are All Right and how it's her time to finally win an Oscar, but I think Portman's work is much more complex. I haven't seen Michelle Williams in Blue Valentine yet, will do so tonight, but I've seen all the other contenders and think Portman deserves the Best Actress gold this year. Kunis, who seems to only get more captivating the older she gets, keeps us guessing as Lily, Nina's competitor. Her friendliness and steady gaze give nothing away about her true motives. Sometimes it's harder, and more interesting, to hide something in a performance than to show too much, and Kunis does the former, keeping the conflict in play throughout the film. Barbara Hershey, playing Nina's mother who is a former ballerina, manages to make Mom sympathetic. As Hershey said in the Q&A session I attended, more on that below, she's not a mother from hell but a mother in hell, one mentally ill person taking care of another mentally ill person. Aronofsky can get a little carried away with imagery in his movies, but here the weirdness works because Nina sees things that aren't rooted in reality. And the way he shoots the ballet is thrilling and visceral, capturing the pain and sweat and blood of it all along with the beauty. Finally, a movie that depicts how women in a competitive environment actually feel about each other, at least I think. Black Swan is a spellbinding psychological thriller, a genre whose entrants have been sparse in recent history. Working with a fantastic cast and a first-rate script, director Darren Aronofsky has crafted a superior film about a topic that shouldn't be all that scary: ballet. The toll, both mentally and physically, that the profession takes on its employees, however, is a different story. Veteran ballerina Nina Sayers, Portman, lives and breathes her work. And it has paid off. The director of her company's performance of Swan Lake, Thomas Cassel, has selected Nina to replace prima ballerina Beth Ryder as the Swan Queen. Nina's mother, Hershey, a former ballerina who lives vicariously through her accomplishments, couldn't be happier. Things take a dark turn when Lily, a hotshot dancer from San Francisco, arrives on the scene and begins to impress Thomas. Nina sees her as a direct threat to her part, and soon begins a downward mental spiral of recklessness and paranoia. Aronofsky establishes a sense of dread from the outset. Every scene drips with uncertainty and indiscriminate motives. Is Nina truly losing her mind? Is everyone out to get her? Is it all a dream? The screenplay provides no easy answers, but spawns plenty of theories. Aronofsky delivers the shocks when we're least expecting, especially in the form of body horror and bizarre sexual fantasies. The latter third of the film is almost unbearably intense, culminating in a finale that is sure to have opinions flying on the way out of the theater. With this performance, Natalie Portman has established herself as one of the premier actresses working today. Grueling in all respects, Portman creates a character that is endlessly paranoid, terrified, and looking for a way out of her introverted shell. Mila Kunis is similarly effective as the Is She Evil? Lily. Naturally beautiful and confident, she excels at personifying the freewheeling polar opposite of Nina. Vincent Cassel and Barbara Hershey provide excellent supporting performances, as does an ultra-creepy Winona Ryder as a former dancer who is losing it. Black Swan is a true suspense experience, and it's a welcome one. We too often settle for the status quo in horror. Black Swan puts the story first and builds the suspense and horror around it. This is one of Aronofsky's most accomplished works, and easily his most accessible film to date. With this film and The Wrestler, he has become the master of telling engaging stories about people who are willing to put their bodies on the line for our entertainment. This is a masterful piece of work, and one of the best films of 2010. Never in my right mind would I have thought to watch a film about ballet dancers. Admittedly, I'm not sophisticated enough to partake in any sort of classical theater, though I did listen to a bit of The Nutcracker once, my nose titled Upward with Class. But after seeing Darren Aronofsky's Black Swan, my world has obviously changed. So it is time for me to bring out my monocle, spot myself a glass of fine wine, and commence my review for the film that combines the mind-bending thrills of Requiem for a Dream and the tale of self-discovery that was present in Aronofsky's last film, The Wrestler, which confidentially serves an innocent side dish to what is sure to become a worldwide phenomena, offering a glimpse into the director's own dark fantasy. Nina Sayers, Natalie Portman, is an immensely dedicated, evident in her bulimia and bloody yet incredibly flexible feet which stem from hours upon hours of practice on a daily basis, albeit troubled ballet dancer. An incarnate of goodness, she is, however, in order to land the central spot in Playboy director Thomas Leroy's, Vincent Cassel, new season of Swan Lake, a show that promises to retell the classic through a modern lens, which is all in attempt to win back audiences who yearn for something fresh. But although Nina has been repressed to the point of retaining a childlike innocence and naivete, namely by her psychotic mother, Erica, Barbara Hershey, an ex-dancer who lives her life through her daughter, her much-wanted role as the Swan Queen creates animosity amongst her fellow dancers. One such rivalry, chronicled throughout most of Black Swan, involves Lily, Mila Kunis, a fresh face, whose cunning and seductive mannerisms make her a formidable counterpart to Nina. Of course, Lily is symbolic of the Black Swan, a concept that is foreign to Nina, who is, in fact, a child stuck in an adult's body. This is made evident through one pivotal scene, in which Nina, who has become increasingly indulgent in her dark side, throws away all of the stuffed animals that would formerly decorate her small room, which doesn't even have a lock. Lily uses her arsenal of sex, drugs, and manipulation to reign supreme in Nina's work and personal life, even going as far as to making advances towards Leroy, who admittedly, is scum, but who Nina adores for his own batch of sexuality. But in this Freudian nightmare, color is almost as important as the characters that inhabit this world. There is a sharp contrast between black and white in Aronofsky's latest. The most explicit example is in the costume design. Nina wears white/light colors, whereas Lily adorns darker tones. Although one small scene, that a majority of audience members have missed, has Winona Ryder's character, Beth McIntyre, the former Swan Queen, aka the Dying Queen, hospitalized following a near-fatal incident. In this key, yet seemingly unimportant scene, the lighting, usually a forgotten albeit extremely important part of filmmaking, has been deliberately set so that only half of her face is covered in shadow. The imagery, creating the image of a two-sided queen, channels both the white and the black swan which has led to her destruction, foreshadows Nina's destiny. Mixed in with equally suitable, and terrific, set design, and this centralized color scheme becomes Black Swan's key atmospheric element. I believe, however, that it is mandatory to specify that leading actress, Natalie Portman, has reportedly trained for up to a year prior to shooting Black Swan. This shows an immense, and commendable, respect for her craft, which is further reinforced in her brilliant performance. She transforms herself for the role, being nearly unrecognizable, the Portman that most casual moviegoers don't know. That being said, her dancing is electrifying, channeling the very spirit of ballet itself, perhaps even channeling her inner Oscar winner, which this performance has a fairly good chance of bringing. However, that wasn't meant to understate the brilliance of the performances by Kunis, who utterly surprised me, Hershey, who shocked me, and Cassel, who backed up my claim that he is one of the best names in modern cinema. All three are perfect in their own right, exhibiting emotions left and right and remaining unmistakably believable, though I admit to having a bit of bias here, as I'm still mesmerized by Cassel's work in Mesrin, Killer Instinct, and Mesrin, Public Enemy No. 1. To see him in an American film was simply mind-blowing, but I don't expect the same reaction from other people, but hey, I'm a die-hard fan. Now, as much as I enjoyed Black Swan, nothing is perfect. Mark Heyman, Andres Heinz, and John J. McLaughlin's script does have beautiful and organic, and almost poetic, dialogue, but the film does have its moments where it feels oversaturated and some superfluous plot devices could have been scrapped. In addition, some minor side characters were a bit underdeveloped. Regardless of its flaws, none of which are necessarily damning, Black Swan marks an important chapter in director Darren Aronofsky's career. His direction, which reminded me of Stanley Kubrick's trademark technique, a compliment no doubt, alongside a beautiful score which consists of some of Swan Lake's most famous tunes, tie the film up very nicely, making it a true Herculean masterpiece. Black Swan is macabre indulgent crap. Although exquisitely crafted, it's ultimately a waste of 2 hours. Director Darren Aronofsky's touch is so heavy-handed and blunt in his tale of spiraling meltdown. Natalie Portman is powerful as Nina, and will win an Oscar. Black Swan is classic tragedy, but lacks eloquence and resonance. Paradoxically, Aronofsky's sledgehammer-like narrative overwhelms the elusive grace and refinement of ballet. I admired Aronofsky's The Wrestler, also a tale of deceptive physicality and discipline. However, something is amuck here. Even as literal metaphor of Swan Lake, Black Swan morphs as a very unpleasant experience. Portman's Nina hauntingly says, "I just want to be perfect." This echoes throughout as tortured obsession. Aside from the magnificent prowess of dance, the screenplay by Mark Heyman, Andres Heinz, and John McLaughlin is unrelenting waves of corporeal rage and suffering. The handheld camera shots in Black Swan give it a gritty and austere feel. Natalie Portman trained nearly 2 years to prepare for the role of Nina Sayers. Her protruding ribs in her breast are scary authenticity. Her gaunt persona captures the rigid and wounded-spirited Nina, who is an impeccable technician, but fearful of risking the freedom of her art. As the story unfolds, perhaps her instincts were warranted. Portman is riveting and nuanced. She enrolls us into Nina's life despite Aronofsky's opaque narrative strokes. Nina suffers blistering nerve rashes and mangled toes. Nina is the dedicated ballerina, who is finally called to audition for the role of the Swan Queen in Swan Lake. Director Thomas, darkly charming Vincent Cassel, knows that Nina can embody the white swan, but questions whether she can summon the dark fire of the black swan. Thomas replaces his aging lover prima ballerina Beth, used and tragic Winona Ryder, in his envisioning of Swan Lake. Nina is aware that she may be auditioning for more than just the lead. Her obsessive stage mom Erica, dramatically taught Barbara Hershey, also fears the inevitable. Erica is eerily controlling, and as a former dancer proxies her life for her daughter Nina. Here Aronofsky brilliantly exposes Nina as one who forsakes greatness for perfection. However, I think he forfeits this thread in the catharsis. Enter Mila Kunis's Lily, the Black Swan of the tale. Lily is the talented untamed dancer, willing to risk all in life and in dance. Lily lacks the precision of Nina, but possesses unbridled passion and sensuality. Lily and Nina are logical rivals, and lyrical yin and yang of the same person. If you are a fan of YouTube, you are aware of their erotic sapphic tryst. It is captivating, however, like much of Black Swan this occurs as manipulation on the part of the director. The concluding arc of Black Swan lost me. Halfway through, we get that Nina is battling for her own sanity. To that end, Portman is amazing and displays poignant suffering and muted joy. The performances are grand. Cassel is creepy duplicity. Kunis is awesome as the maverick dancer living on the edge. I think Black Swan fails despite great effort in exposing the perfection myth. Yes, perfection is manifested in youth, beauty, and talent. There is perfection in icons like James Dean and Bruce Lee. The tragedy of these icons was that the possibility of greatness was forsaken too soon. Black Swan celebrates the pursuit of perfection, not the legacy of greatness of altering and inspiring the world. Perfection is misguided and fleeting pursuit. Greatness is the game worth playing and living. Black Swan seems to miss this distinction, and that is a little sad. Since the crushing flop that The Fountain has been, come on, how many of you even remembered it? Darren Aronofsky has become a born-again author. By that, I mean that he left behind his MTV-laced, heavy-on editing, fast-paced directing style, for something more simple, more visceral. Camera on shoulder, lots of close UPS, tight and packed up frames, etc. At first, I missed the demented mind that put Requiem for a Dream into images with a terrifying success, but his new style works a lot better for Black Swan than it did for The Wrestler in 2008. Or was it just flat out a better film? Maybe it was Natalie Portman's strong interpretation, or Vincent Cassel's eternal bad guy routine, but I thought Black Swan was Darren Aronofsky's best movie since Requiem for a Dream. The subject is already a lot more gripping than a beat-up wrestler, trying to squeeze out a few dollars. Nina Sayers, Portman, is a ballerina in a dance company who is opening its season with a bare, raw interpretation of Swan Lake. The choreographer Thomas, Cassel, wants to put some emotion, a fresh vision into this classic. For this, he selects Nina, the most technical, yet the coldest dancer of the company, and takes on himself to try to corrupt her and put her in the right state of mind to play the Black Swan, which is an evil part. Since the White and the Black Swan are twins, they need to be played by the same dancer. Only problem, Nina is psychologically fragile. She grew up with a single, abusive mother, in an unhealthy environment, so any kind of tremor will send her spiraling down into madness. And as usual, Vincent Cassel doesn't help. He gets Lily Kunis, a sexually liberal, for a lack of a better term, to work on Nina's case. Like I previously said, Aronofsky's newfound style helps carrying the intensity of his point. The introverted Nina has a flourishing inner world that turns into weirdly convincing daydreaming, to straight-up hallucinations. And I'm not talking about the common Hollywood cliché hallucination, the converse about the hermeneutics of French writers with you kind, but rather the realistic split-second moment of terror one. The intimacy and the claustrophobia of the close-ups, the tight frames and soundtrack are well adjusted to Nina's fragile psyche. I think that what got me the most was the gradual use of Swan Lake's score, to symbolize Nina's symbiosis with the Black Swan. As her actions get more radical and her hallucinations get to be more overbearing, she heard the soundtrack of the ballet louder and louder. And that, my friends, is the essence of real insanity. The loss of differentiation in between the reality and the image. I am not sure I have seen a director capture this as well as Aronofsky did. Madness first lies in the detail, then in the absolute, and Black Swan is right about that. I don't think there's anything I disliked about the movie. Barbara Hershey was a bit shoddy by times, but she has a very secondary role. The presence of Winona Ryder's character is also kind of useless to the story, but I suspect she was put there by Aronofsky as an attempt of total faithfulness to the original text. There is also that weird burger eating scene that I didn't get. Black Swan's flaws are so small and the intensity grows so high that you forget about them and finish the movie mesmerized, completely oblivious to any sort of cracks in that monumental work. Some people might be startled by the ballet part of the movie, but it's minor, it serves the purpose of showing Nina's descent into madness. Black Swan has been billed as a thriller/drama, but it's also a tragedy, in the classical sense of the term. It's a very good example of reappropriating and redeploying a timeless dramatic structure, to present a new era of viewers. This should have got the Best Movie Oscar. Because it's spectacular, because it's difficult, and because it lives up to the challenge. Impulsion. Suspiria. Shine. The Piano Teacher. These were 4 movies Black Swan made me think of without effort. Others have brought up Persona and Mulholland Drive. They work too. It doesn't really matter which movies people bring up in connection with Darren Aronofsky's movie, the bottom line is, they're all likely to be superior than this derivative mess. Imagine if Brian Geeson, instead of cutting up newspapers to compose poems, cut up famous films to make a new one. We'd call it Brian Geeson's Black Swan. Natalie Portman plays Nina, a repressed ballet dancer with low self-esteem who's dominated by her mother, Barbara Hershey, a former dancer who gave up her career to have Nina and who experiences glory through her daughter's success. And success arrives when Thomas Leroy, Vincent Cassel, Nina's company director, offers her the roles of the White Swan/Black Swan in Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake. But Nina, the meek, virginal damsel, will have to get in touch with her dark side in order to play the role of the sensual, dangerous Black Swan. Will she manage it, or will the pressure drive her crazy? This is a rhetorical question, by the way. There's really no suspense here. Nina is a basket case from the start. As soon as the movie starts, she's already lost in hallucinations. There's also no explanation why Thomas, who's never seen Nina display a dark side, thinks she can play the dual role. It must be faith. Of course, to help her, he sort of sexually harasses her, taunts her in front of others, and even suggests she masturbate to live a little. Cassel, a provocative devil to the angelic Portman, is a delight to watch and delivers arguably the only good performance in the movie. Sexy, bullying and arrogant, he'll destroy Nina's self if that will get a great performance out of her. The rest of the cast isn't up to much. Hershey and Winona Ryder, who plays an aging dancer forced into retirement so Nina can have her role, deliver efficient performances considering the weak material they got. Portman, desperate to prove her thespian talents, oscillates between hysteria and mediocrity. Watching her, I didn't have the impression I was watching a tour de force, but a little girl pretending to be an excellent actress playing a poorly written character who's supposed to be a complex and tormented ballet dancer. The movie makes a big deal about how Nina's dancing style must change to suit the Black Swan. It's seductive, looser, and more uncontrolled. We're supposed to think that when she finally plays the Black Swan it'll be a transcendental moment. Somehow she will marvel us with the perfection of her performance, a perfection she achieves at a very hard price and with much sacrifice. But it's exactly the way Nina plays every time in the movie. The audience claps fiercely, Thomas congratulates her, but nothing has changed. The cast, which isn't very remarkable, fails to salvage the script, which is awful. Is the movie at least technically good? I'm on the fence. The cinematography and editing are efficient. Aronofsky brings in interesting horror aesthetics too. I love all the tricks of the trade he employs to show Nina's madness, mirror reflections moving independently, her face projected on others, talking drawings. From David Lynch he lifts spooky sound effects that underscore tension and the fragmentation of reality. When the movie focuses on Nina's madness, it's quite good actually. Her sense of persecution is quite believable, especially when she suspects that Lily, Mila Kunis, is trying to steal the lead role from her. Kunis doesn't do much either, but it's fascinating that the perception of her as an antagonist is not supported by anything she does but only by what goes on in Nina's mind. Sadly, the movie also uses visual effects that cheesy B-horror movies would only use at gunpoint. The scene of Nina turning into a black swan in the movie's climax looks distractingly fake in a way that a Cronenberg or Carpenter movie 30 years ago, with less money, wouldn't have. Then there's the simplistic color scheme. Nina wears white because she's good and innocent, Lily wears black, and if that's not obvious enough, she has black wings tattooed on her back. When Nina starts going dark, she starts wearing dark. Perhaps Aronofsky thought the hearing impaired in the audience couldn't get the color/concept association right from the countless times the screenplay spelled it out loud, so here's some nice visual support. Black Swan is as unbalanced as Nina's sanity, a poorly written movie taking itself more seriously than its foundations on pop psychology, cliches about tormented geniuses and melodramas permitted. The result is over-the-top kitsch. Nothing stands out except Tchaikovsky's music, which, in comparison to the one by Clint Mansell, the fraud of frauds of film music, shows how low the standards in film music have fallen. A few composers could give Tchaikovsky a run for his money: Ennio Morricone, Georges Delerue, the recently deceased John Barry, but not Mansell. Here he seems satisfied with the tracks Angelo Badalamenti must have decided not to use in Twin Peaks, Fire Walk With Me. This is what the whole movie looks like: leftovers from other movies, half-good ideas, untapped potential. It aims at the magnificence of Swan Lake, but it soars only to fall to its death like Icarus. Black Swan is one of the most unique films I've seen in a very long time. It's a well-crafted, menacingly dark, vividly imaginative movie that coasts on a strong central performance from Natalie Portman and some voyeuristic direction from Darren Aronofsky. The movie follows Nina, Portman, a young prodigy ballet dancer getting the biggest break of her career as the lead in a newly imagined version of Swan Lake. It's a pretty simple film, but one that handles the simplicity with such boldness that the film evolves into one of the most finely crafted films of the year. Portman gives what could be one of her finest performances, if for once, because she's less inside her own head on screen. She moves freely, precisely, expertly, and her calm demeanor slowly erodes as she begins to morph into the Black Swan. Her subtle progression through her own life is organic and feels natural, as Nina trades in her nice, protected life for one a little more on the edge. Aronofsky's in-your-face, zestful direction again takes center stage, as he implants you into the surprisingly cutthroat world of ballet. It is uninhibited style that allows the movie to fill itself in. The movie is visual and cerebral, and succeeds because it admirably aspires to be more than it is. It's melodramatic yet artfully tactful in its pursuit of its final goal. It's the type of film that continues to fester itself in your mind for days, even weeks, after you experience it, as you try to figure out the answer to the one major question the film presents. And a lot of folks will have their own answer to that question. Though I think the film is pretty simple to understand on a basic level, there is a lot of subtext that the audience is left to fill in for themselves, though again I think the answer to that is pretty simple too. The movie is a visual mindfuck, and there are some supernatural themes at play at moments. The performances are all good, with the standout obviously being Portman in the lead role. I've always been really on the fence about Portman, mainly because she has never floored me with any given performance. She does that here. Her command of the role is paramount to its overall success, as she is unflinching in her delicacy throughout the bulk of the film. This is a major accomplishment, because it makes the final moments feel much bolder, really highlighting the transformation Nina has undergone in the entire movie up to that point. Supporting performances by Vincent Cassel and Mila Kunis are also good, particularly Cassel's turn as the production's director. He walks a pretty high tightrope, because he could have really cartooned up this performance if he had wanted to be more of the focus. The possibility is there for him to steal the scenes he's in, and to a degree he does, but he never allows his character to overshadow the featured actresses. I credit Cassel and Aronofsky for not letting that happen here. Black Swan is a tough movie to recommend because it can be a tough one to digest if you haven't got the stomach, but it's a tough one to process if you haven't got the intelligence either. There is a lot of tension throughout the film, including tons bubbling under the surface that you can't explicitly see. The movie will divide audiences, but it is a well-made film that boasts a terrific central performance from Natalie Portman and really elevates director Darren Aronofsky into the elite level of current American film directors. This film, directed by Darren Aronofsky, screenplay by Mark Heyman, story by Andres Hines, produced by Mike Medavoy, starring Natalie Portman, cinematography Matthew Libatique, edited by Andrew Weisblum, music by Clint Mansell, production companies Cross Creek Pictures, distributed by Fox Searchlight Pictures, release date September 1, 2010, running time 108 minutes, country United States, language English, budget $13 million, box office $332.1 million.